What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Meaning of Podcast. I am Ace.
This is RB3.
And this is the podcast where we get into your favorite filmmakers' movies and we get into the deeper meaning of those movies. And we're very excited for this episode because in anticipation for The Shape of Water, we're doing a Guillermo del Toro episode, or as everyone else says it, Guillermo del Toro. And I'm actually really excited because obviously we haven't seen Shape of Water because it hasn't come out yet nationwide, but Guillermo del Toro, I don't know, I gotta pick now. I gotta pick how to say it.
Listen, I was gonna say, man.
I was gonna say, if I say Guillermo del Toro, people are gonna say, that's weird. If I say Guillermo del Toro, people are gonna say, that's weird.
I don't know where to go with this. I'm just gonna go with Del Toro, or Guillermo. I don't know.
Yeah, because it's one of those things where it's like, no matter how I say it, I'm just gonna get comments that are weird. You know what? I'm gonna say it both ways. I'm gonna say it with an American accent and with the original accent. But anyways, this guy is a filmmaker that is beloved. He is a filmmaker that is known as a genius. He is known as someone who does very authentic stuff, production design, a lot of crazy stuff that he's known for. Obviously Supernatural and Creatures and all that. He's known for that. But this is obviously a filmmaker who's very much in the spotlight right now, and a filmmaker that I enjoy quite a bit. And starting with that, I mean, obviously we're gonna dive deep. I know RB3 took a ton of notes for this.
Oh yeah.
So I'm pumped to get into this. But before we do, we want to read your questions from the last episode. Make sure you guys leave us comments on every episode because we will be reading them, and we most likely will read your comment on the episode. So with that, our last episode was about it was a Q&A, but we started it out with indies and blockbusters of 2017, and this wasn't my thoughts behind making this a conversation wasn't to say which one's better. It's never about that. It's mainly I was just curious to see like a 2017 comparison between the two, like what we've had in quality of films and how surprisingly we've had a mix of both. Yeah. That was just kind of what I wanted to do with this conversation. But we have a comment from Tanner. He says, I feel you, Ace. Usually my top 10 of the year is 90% indies. This year, it's about 50-50. I don't know if there's been a lack of great indies or the blockbusters have just been better than usual this time. My favorites so far are Dunkirk, Baby Driver, Blade Runner 2049, Lady Bird, Logan, It, Three Billboards, A Ghost Story, etc. It's been a mix of both this year. That's what Tanner said is basically what I was trying to say. The fact that how usually I'm like indies, and then maybe two blockbusters in my top 10. Now I'm like, there's been a lot of good blockbusters this year. And that's kind of surprising. I mean, usually blockbusters are okay, but they're not ever at the quality level of the indie films that I see this year. What do you think of that?
No, I mean, I think there's definitely a point to that because now, we kind of mentioned it last episode, the indie directors are starting to come in and direct these big budget feature films, and I'm starting to get more experience with that. A lot of times it's a crapshoot whether or not you get an indie guy coming to big blockbusters and they're able to do something interesting, or maybe they're not. But a lot of these people we're talking about, Logan was directed by James Mangold, very established director, multiple Academy Award winning films. It was Andy Muschietti. He had the backing of course, our director today, Guillermo del Toro, and he's, and he has a good background with horror. And a lot of the other blockbusters, Denis Villeneuve, one of the best directors working today. You can check out our episode about him when we talk about him. Of course, he's going to make something like Blade Runner 2049, $180 million budget, big budget blockbuster, but he still manages to, he has the established rapport to do something interesting with it. So the indie directors who are able to transcend their like ground roots and make something for a bigger budget under the studios because they have that reliability, that trust, that's when we start to see really interesting movies.
Absolutely. And they have the background of making quality movies already. Now all they have is more money, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's essentially what it is. Obviously, it's a lot more than that, but that's kind of the whole point of that. Let's read another comment. Wasted the Series says, Ace, you are right. Shot Caller is freaking epic. I was completely blown away by the film and was not expecting it. Yeah, Shot Caller is one that I've mentioned quite a bit. I mentioned it on the Schmoes. I mentioned it last time on the episode. It's one of those things where it's a film that is actually pretty good. But again, it pretty much went straight to VOD.
Really?
And no one saw the movie. I don't know how I ran into it. It might have been me just I ran into it just looking through like indies and stuff. Mm-hmm. But also I follow Jamie Lannister, Nikolai Walder Koster on
On
Instagram.
Twitter? Oh, okay.
And he's been promoting the movie, and I'm like, sure, I'll check it out. You know, when you can like support an indie movie anytime you can, even if you want to rent it on VOD, I suggest doing it. It's always a lot of fun.
Yeah.
You haven't seen that one, right?
I haven't seen that one, but I do like, renting movies on something that you could discover. It's cheaper than going to the movies and putting your money on the line there. And plus, you're in the comfort of your own home. You have multiple days to check it out.
Yeah, people frown upon VOD usually when they're like, oh, it's straight to video, it's probably gonna be crap. You never know. You can find some good stuff there. You can find some indies that probably didn't get a theatrical release.
Yeah,
because some indies struggle to get like.
Well, one of my favorite movies last year, the one with Craig Robertson, I can't remember the exact name of it right now, but that was a movie that went straight to VOD, and that I ended up discovering, and it was an A24 movie, but it
A24,
it ended up going straight to DirecTV Cinema. But I remember watching that, and I was like, wow, this is one of my favorite movies of the year, and I had to discover it that way. But going off that, I was rewatching last week's episode and kind of reevaluating our kind of discussion on the Netflix versus Amazon and Hulu approach to like distributing their movies and qualifying for Academy Award attention and whatnot. And I kind of realized that I wasn't really going as hard as I actually feel. Okay. Right? Like I think the Netflix model is breaking a lot of rules and setting new ground forward that I think is really important. Whereas the Amazon and the Hulus, they're just kind of pandering to the old model that the Academy has set, and in the way that you're supposed to campaign for movies and the way that you're supposed to distribute your films and whatnot. So I admire Netflix. I'm going to applaud Netflix for what they're doing in that front. And I kind of don't like that Amazon kind of just plays by the rules and does a traditional theatrical release, and we have to wait 6 months to see their movies, be streamed. You know what I mean? So that's my problem. And I think that, by pandering to the system, we're never going to cause change or cause new rules or update the outdated system that it already is. So to me, Netflix
I think it's a tricky thing, but when it comes to art, I get frustrated with Netflix because they just have so much stuff and they just don't promote it as much as they can or don't campaign for it. And my thing is, like, you might be right. They might be pandering for voters and for that. But my thing is, when you put these artists and showcase their art, and it's so good and it's so authentic and it's so real and it's so much quality behind the art, right? Mm-hmm. If you don't push it towards the voters, I feel like it's almost kind of in vain, where it's like, that was cool, but no one saw it, no one heard of it, and no one got recognition for it. Then what's the point? I don't know. To me, it's like, I like what they do, because at least it gives the opportunity for the filmmakers to be recognized for their art and for what they've done, right? What's the point of allowing, like Netflix allows filmmakers to do whatever they want and not recognize them on a award level or on a level where they get views and attention and campaigning? For me, it's like, if you're gonna put the effort in and make all this money and put all this money behind the filmmakers, put the effort to like promote them and campaign for them and get them award attention. That's the thing that always frustrates me for Netflix, is that you have all this great stuff and you just don't put effort behind promoting it or campaigning for it. And it's like, what's the point then? I don't know. That's just thing for me. And for me too, this year, it's going to be all about Mudbound. If Mudbound doesn't get the attention that I think it deserves, then Netflix is doing it wrong. They're just doing it wrong, because Mudbound deserves to have award attention, award recognition. And I feel like they should get it this year. And if they don't, then they have to rethink their strategy. Because what's the point of greenlighting a movie like Mudbound if it gets absolutely no attention and no award recognition?
Well, you kind of got to look back at something like Beast of No Nation that came out a few years ago, and that was right at the height of the Oscar So White controversy and whatnot. And when you saw that movie, they did the proper campaigning. They did the theatrical release. They did all the pushes, and it got a bunch of nominations from SAG, from the PGA. Yeah,
but not from the Academy.
Not from the Academy. But again, the Academy was and still is so out of date, so out of touch. Now they're kind of reforming. They're inviting new members, trying to refresh the brand, bring in more diversity and more youth. And I think that's going to be the positive steps to help bring in change for a lot of, because honestly, if you look at stuff and, to me, music has been a little bit ahead of movies, and so is television. And movies are always just kind of the slowest to react to the general populace and the general pop culture. So I'm really hoping that with Netflix coming in and trying to break down those barriers and break down the rules. And again, with television, it's kind of the same thing with Hulu doing the Handmaid's Tale, releasing them week by week in the same way that FX would or something like that. To me, it's like you're not doing any, you're not changing, you're not promoting a new front, you're not promoting a new change, you're not breaking the rules. You're just kind of sticking to the rules and letting them ride out. So
I might be one of those people who are fighting progress, maybe, and the time will tell, right? Hindsight is 2020.
Right.
But for me, it's like part of the appeal of movies is to watch it in a theater with the biggest screen, with a crowd of people that you may not know. I think the community aspect of watching a movie, I feel like movies should be put and should be watched in theaters. We just came back from watching The Disaster Artist, and that thing was like sold out. Everyone was watching it. People were buying tickets left and right. People couldn't even get in the theater because they wanted to watch that movie so bad. A tiny independent movie made by James Franco, right? This isn't Star Wars. And yet we saw so much attention, so much community, so much laughter behind that movie. If Netflix has their way, which I guess I'm kind of fighting that way. Don't get me wrong, I like watching movies at home, but I feel like movies should be watched in a theater with community behind it, with people paying actual money out of their pocket to pay for that movie, to support the vision of that director, to support it with your hard-earned cash, so that person can be recognized and can be observed in a community aspect. I don't know if I would have loved Get Out as much as I did, because I loved it hardcore, if I didn't see it with a big crowd. Like, I might have loved it. I might have been like, it's a great movie. But the fact that I saw it with that crowd made it an experience, made it something so much more enjoyable of a movie, made it something that I feel like Jordan Peele intended for it to be. I feel like, I don't know, I just feel like movies should be watched in theaters, man. And I feel like putting it in theaters and saying, go support this movie if you think it's good is the best, still the best formula. And it may be outdated, but I just feel like that's the way to do it.
No, I mean, I agree. I think, movies should be playing theaters. To me, I think there should be both. I think people should have options to experience the movies the way that movies, they can. Because, I mean, frankly, a lot of the people that I know that I'm familiar with, and even when I was growing up, it was hard to me to get to the movies because in Compton, there was no movie theater. So I had to drive like 10 miles, 15 miles just to get to a theater to watch something, which is fine. And it's all good because I love movies. We all love movies and we're all fans of movies. But for a lot of the average, I want to see cinema expand to where the average person could just watch anything they want on Netflix at any time. You know what I mean? And if of course, if a movie's like a big budget, we talk about Blade Runner or we talk about Avengers or something like that, of course, put it on a big screen and have it as an event. Still have the event films and whatnot. But I think if we incorporate streaming more into the mainstream and kind of break down that 6-month barrier and just start having the movies be more accessible to people, I think to me that's a positive change on the film industry for film goers. And frankly, I think that will help lower ticket prices a lot too, because having the options at home will force theaters and studios to get more competitive, and maybe that could result in better theater treatments and also in cheaper ticket prices. So
sure, I feel like accessibility is something you're promoting, right?
Yeah,
accessibility is important, but I don't know, man. For me, it's like I feel like it's also important for a director to get their vision on the screen and to support it with, I don't know, I'm just old school like that, where I feel like if you have the option to see a movie, go see it in theaters. Right. And the biggest selling point of a movie, no matter what, is always going to be word of mouth.
Yeah.
And if enough people haven't seen the movie that you're talking about, you could tell all your friends and stuff. But the fact is, it won't reach a major audience or a bigger audience than the filmmaker who made the movie. As much as you can say accessibility and see anything you want, the quality doesn't bubble up to the surface as much as if it was in the theatrical release, in my opinion, right? If you have 1,000 movies and you say 450 of these are great, what's the reality that you're going to get attention for them? Whereas, like, if I have 1,000 movies and then I put these many in theaters and I say these many are great, go watch these 2 movies, more people are willing to say, okay. That's just my opinion, where it's like word of mouth is always going to be the best option. And accessibility might sound like a great idea, but maybe too many options is too many options. And that doesn't allow the filmmakers who really made something amazing to be showcased in that amazing aspect. I don't know. For me, this is always an issue, right? Because it comes to the fact of like, take a look at a movie like Wind River, or A Ghost Story, or even Shot Caller, where these are movies that are great, but they probably won't get the amount of attention as a Lady Bird. And Lady Bird is great. It's one of my favorites of the year, but I would say it's just as great as the movies I've saw previously, right? Mm-hmm. But the problem is word of mouth doesn't push it as much as other movies. That's always going to be the barrier between the movies, is like, go see this one and you hear more about this one than if the other ones I've talked about. It's almost, I don't know, I just feel like supporting a movie in theatrical release and saying, go watch this movie, is still the best formula. I might be wrong, but we'll see.
To me, what you're describing is kind of what a lot of the future of, I think, media is going to end up becoming. Because when we see something like YouTube, for example, where we're on right now, there's like 1 million hours of content uploaded every day. So everybody's going to be continuously forced to consume as much content as of rampant succession as possible. So cinema is one of the last things that is not being inundated in that sense. You know what I mean? But now we're getting more theatrical releases than any time before in history. Now we're having more movies being produced than any time ever in history. And I think, to me, what I mean, it depends. Again, when we were talking about the filmmakers receiving recognition or having the attention for their films, I mean, I guess it really depends on the question of, do we consume art for the art, or do artists make movies for art, or do they make art or movies for business, or do they make it for the recognition, or
both?
All
the above.
Yeah. So, but now that we're taking the marketing aspect out of the equation, will it become more? Will we see more forward-thinking art? Because to me, even though like the big Netflix movies that a lot of people haven't seen, to me are still my favorites, like Okja.
Sure, and that's great, but the problem with that is the fact that art is only as good as its promotion. Or if I can make the best thing ever, but if no one sees it, is it the best thing ever? If a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, did it make a sound? You see what I'm saying, though? Yeah. Like art is meant to be pushed. It's meant to be promoted. It's meant to be consumed by people so it can appreciate its beauty. So people can say, wow, I'm so glad I saw that. Thank you for telling me. And so millions more can see it. Whereas like I can say I saw a movie like A Shot Caller or A Ghost Story, and the 10 other people who saw it are like, yo, that shit was dope, but no one else saw it. So what's the point? I just feel like I can personally appreciate it. But I think personally appreciating is a limited vision or a limited perspective, where if I can reach 30, 40 people, and if that makes you happy, cool. But what if you can reach 30, 40 million people? Wouldn't that be better? For you, for art, for humanity as a whole to experience more quality and better art? Wouldn't you want that? Like, that's just my perspective. I get what you're saying, but I sometimes say the same thing. Some of my favorites of the year, no one saw. Like last year in my top 10 movies, or even the year before, I named like 3 or 4 films that literally no one saw. Right. It was like straight to VOD type stuff. And it's one of those things where it's as great as I think it is, and it's great as much as I can tell you to go see it. If you hear from one person to go see this VOD film versus you hear from 1,000 people to go see Lady Bird, who are you going to listen to? I'm going to listen to 1,000 people who said go see Lady Bird. And guess what? I'm glad I saw Lady Bird. Whereas, like, I just feel like art is only as good as the people who consume it. And I feel like consumption should be based on quality. And I'm glad that more filmmakers are getting quality behind it. But I feel like the Netflix model is just, here's stuff. Go find it, and if it's cool, then whatever. And go tell your friends about it. And then 5 of your friends hear about it. Like, what was the point of that? I don't know. That's just... This can go on for hours. This conversation. Right. Let's just go to Guillermo del Toro, because this guy is a filmmaker that I'm very much passionate about, and I definitely want to jump into him. This guy is definitely not a subtle filmmaker, as one of my friends said it best. He's known for making something that is very visual style. Sometimes people say it's style over some substance.
Right.
He's a very artistic guy. He's an auteur, and obviously he's a Mexican director. And me being a Latino and me being Mexican, it's always going to be that thing where it's so great to see all these Mexican directors having their own specific vision and being so different from each other.
Right.
Like you have Alfonso Cuarón and you have Alejandro Inarritu, and you have obviously Guillermo del Toro. Those are some of the biggest directors, and I'm so glad that these guys are getting recognized for their art, and they're all so different in their perspective, even though they've come from the same, country and it's probably similar upbringing. But what's great too is seeing the kind of art that comes out of Mexico. Right, because I was watching Coco over last week. You haven't seen it yet, right?
I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, and Coco kind of touches upon this so well. It's the ancient history of the art of Mexico, where it's like it's not just music, even though music is a huge part of us. It's the music, it's the art, it's expressionist art. It's so much different variety that comes out of Mexico, and it's such an artistic country that I'm so glad that we can see this in film so much. Because it's not just consumed or it's not just expressed in one format, but so many different formats. And the Guillermo del Toro format is one that some people like more than others, but I think it's such a interesting kind of classic, not classic, but kind of old-timey in the sense of like it's very in your face and it's very not quiet. It's very loud, and it's very loud and expressionist. And I don't know. I love Guillermo del Toro's films, and I love what he does. And obviously, some films are better than others. But I definitely want to hear your thoughts. And a question I want to bring up to you is a question that I usually bring up: is what does Guillermo del Toro mean to you personally?
Right. Well, for me, Guillermo del Toro is an auteur of our generation. He brings a lot of substance in his art. We kind of alluded to the idea that a lot of people kind of have developed the idea of style over substance. To me, all of his films are style with substance, and that's even more evident through something like Pan's Labyrinth, which is one of the first Guillermo del Toro movie I saw, and that was the film that kind of got me into a lot of his movies, and one of the early films that I watched when I was starting to develop a fandom for cinema. So, and that movie's still to this day one of my favorites, even watching it now, because it incorporates a great fantasy story with the hero's journey and all of this stuff, but also integrates some great social commentary about the Spanish Civil War, and it's aside from being a great fantasy movie, it's a great war movie, great political thriller, as well as being a very emotional tell as well, and all of his, and we're going to continue to talk about all of his movies more in depth, but I think that's really what is at the core of his movies, is the idea of tragedy. The idea of tragedy and is a microcosm of the greater societal issues that we're approaching, whether that be Pacific Rim, whether that be in Hellboy, or any other movies we're going to talk about. We're going to discuss that as well, but all of that, to me, that's what makes a great filmmaker, is somebody who could integrate a style and integrate their vision and their interpretation of the world with the real world aspects and reality that's happening right now. Is really fascinating.
Yeah, he's one of those guys who doesn't hide what he's feeling very much. He doesn't say it in a. Obviously, I mentioned this before, but he doesn't say it in a quiet way. I also mentioned this before, but I think it's worth repeating. Is I remember watching Blade 2 with one of my friends. First time he's ever seen it, and I'm promoting the crap out of this movie. I've been promoting this movie since it came out. I've been being like, yo, watch Blade 2, though. It's dope. And I love Blade 2. Obviously, I came out in the Collider top 50. Yeah. And I literally, when they asked me to do that, they were like, oh, we don't really have time to do a lot. And I'm like, as long as I talk about Blade 2, I'm happy. Yeah. Really? Blade 2 over Man of Steel, Superman, and Batman, and all these other movies? I'm like, Blade 2. Let me just talk about Blade 2. Because I love that movie. And one of my friends, as a scene was happening, and I turned to my friend and I'm like, yo, this is crazy. I forgot how crazy this movie was. And he's like, yeah, Guillermo del Toro is not a subtle filmmaker. And I'm like, that's such a good line, because that's such a interesting way of putting it. It's not necessarily style over substance. It's more that it's not subtle. It's very overt. It's very forward in the way that he presents something to you. And that's what I enjoy so much about it. Let's jump into his first three movies that are probably the most unknown of his movies. And that's Chronos, Mimic, and The Devil's Backbone. those three movies came out, and they're all. It's interesting to say because I definitely want to talk about this, but it's a theme. Del Toro has themes in all his movies.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry, Del Toro has themes that he spans across all his movies.
Right.
So basically, it's one thing, and he says it in pretty much every single one of his movies. And one of the themes he has that pretty much reaches across every single one of his movies is the supernatural.
Oh, yeah.
And I definitely want to talk about the supernatural with you, especially with these three movies, which are all based on supernatural entities. Supernatural creatures, his obsession with something that, whether it be a ghost or an insect creature or a demon with Hellboy, obviously, or whatever it may be, or a ghost, a demon, a spirit, a vampire, or in the Pacific Rim, alien, interdimensional alien, like a kaiju, right? It's all based on some sort of supernatural entity, and it's his kind of perspective on what the supernatural means to him, and whether he takes it on a surface level, as far as like on a, when I say surface level, I mean like the supernatural is real. There is actually ghosts, there are actually demons, there are actually creatures that we don't know about because they're in some sort of different dimension, and if they enter this world, what kind of chaos or what kind of beauty they may bring, versus the metaphor of a ghost or the metaphor of a demon, or the demon representing a natural demonic feeling, or a ghost representing the past, like he does in Crimson Peak.
Yeah. Well, I think in all of his movies.
In all his movies, right? But it's also, it's the surface as far as like I don't know if he actually believes in the supernatural, versus the metaphorical, the themes, the spiritual aspects of life, or the escapism of how we deal with tragedy, and we use creatures and fantasy and fantastical things to kind of take our mind off the actual supernaturally evil stuff that's going on in the real world.
Yeah, it's like the text versus the subtext, right? What's under the surface the whole time. And I think it's especially prevalent, and we're talking about his ghost stories, and the first three films of his, I haven't really checked out Mimic and Chronos, but The Devil's Backbone is one that I enjoy a lot, because that's the most clearest example of, there's this ghost figure by the name of Suti, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, but he's reflecting on like the looming death and presence. He was murdered early on in the movie, and he's just kind of haunting this little orphanage, but not haunting in a scary way, just kind of hanging around, because that's all he really knows. And you hear Guillermo talk, and he has this quote, and we're talking about The Devil's Backbone and Pan's Labyrinth, both set during the Spanish Civil War, and Pan's Labyrinth 5 years after. But Devil's Backbone is set during that time, and it opens with the bomb dropping inside of the orphanage, right in the middle of it.
And it's such a striking visual, too.
And it doesn't leave. And that's kind of like a resemblance of power and activity, this looming presence. And that's really what he's going for with these ghost characters. And he has this quote where he says, "The Civil War, which has never been completely healed in Spain, is a ghost. Anything pending is a ghost." So for him, especially in The Devil's Backbone, and we're going to talk about Pan's Labyrinth a little bit later, but for his representation, for his lies, the ghosts are a representation of the legacy of war, of the Civil War. And a lot of times he has children as his protagonists, on the fact that when we look at ghosts, or when we look at the history of the Spanish Civil War, which was kind of overshadowed because 5 years later we had World War II. So a lot of people don't really talk about the Spanish Civil War in history. So it's kind of like a lost legacy, lost, forgotten memory. Same way when we're kids, when we have imaginations and fairy tales and all that stuff, we just kind of forget it over time. So that's kind of the deeper metaphor that I caught in a lot of his films. And so and he also has a great thing with eyes too, and we're going to talk about that. But there's a lot of great imagery that he presents that kind of leads the audience in the direction that we're supposed to follow his vision at. So
yeah, it's great, and it's obviously I definitely want to talk about another aspect of his filmmaking, and it's one of the key themes in horror. And it's crazy how he kind of is a horror director in a way, right? He's known for at least horror aspects or horror imagery in the majority of his films, and that's kind of what the supernatural represents as far as in a filmmaking way, right? It usually represents horror. You know, demons, ghosts, creatures, all that stuff usually represents a horror aspect. But in other versions, we see it in a fantastical aspect too with Pan's Labyrinth. But we'll get into that. I want to talk about Mimic a little bit, specifically with. Obviously, Guillermo del Toro is known for a visual director, and he's known for the kind of visuals he creates. But some of the visuals that he creates that I was kind of thinking about the other day rewatching Pan's Labyrinth is disturbing imagery.
Yeah.
The imagery of something that not necessarily just disturbing in the sense of... because when I say disturbing imagery, it's such an easy term, but disturbing in the sense of like, holy crap, that's so gross and so disgusting. Because Mimic has a insect kind of vibe, where it's like a lot of giant, like stuff that will freak the crap out of me.
Oh, yeah.
And especially like anyone who's like not a fan of insects, they're not gonna like this movie at all. But it's supposed to be very disturbing. And what's more visually repulsive than flies or insects or the process of insects like breaking out of their shells and all this disgusting stuff, you know, like spewing out of the insects, or insects eating other insects, and stuff that just really literally grosses you out. The best way to say it is gross, like gross, disgusting imagery that sends a chill down your spine because of how disturbing it is. And he actually does that a little bit in Pan's Labyrinth and in other films that he has, where it's like imagery that is meant to make you go, ugh. And he does it with a huge emphasis on practical effects and practical makeup, which he's addicted to. Like, he loves it to the core. And I don't know, what are your thoughts on the reasons why he uses so much overtly gross imagery, and why he chooses to do that?
Well, I think, you know, a lot of times when we see that imagery, is a reflection of what's happening with the characters. You know what I mean? Mimic is obviously about some very troubled people, and people who are kind of coping with, you know, the situation that they're dealing with. You know, so and that's the thing we see in a lot of his movies, that is really about the personal trauma, and it's the external coming out, and how vile and disgusting that looks. But it's also, from an audience perspective, I think it really gives a lot of, kind of creates like a shock reaction almost, which is, in a lot of cases can be bad, but I think for his films is good because it really pulls you in. It's like, oh, you don't want to watch it, but it's part of the experience. And it's not something that is coming out of left field in his movies, right? Like, the way the tone is set up, the structure is set up, even if it's something horrific and kind of gross, you're kind of okay with it because that's just you're all in on the story already. So it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and it's crazy how he's Guillermo del Toro. Let's get into that a little bit. Let's get into his practical effects obsession, because he's obsessed with it. He's obsessed with texture. He's obsessed with something that you see on screen, and you know that if you reached out, you can touch it and you can feel it. Whether that be something beautiful, like a set, like a beautiful set, or like Crimson Peak has a lot of beauty, or something gross, like a Mimic, or like a Hellboy, because we do see, like in Hellboy 2, that's gross. Like the insect stuff that happens in that movie, like the first few scenes and stuff, like that's really gross, and that's kind of the stuff he has throughout his movies. He's obsessed with texture and stuff that makes you feel, not just on a sense of like internally feel, but physically feel, like on your skin, with just, you can sense that that's real. And if I touch that, that's gross. Or if I touch that, that's authentic. It's real. It makes you feel something. And he's obsessed with that, so much to the point that, guess what? That costs more money. And usually Guillermo del Toro is known for spending too much money on his films, but I love that he incorporates that, because to me that is the most true statement from Guillermo del Toro. That's the most true thing to him, is the fact that he makes practical effects and he uses them so well, and the fact that I always prefer practical effects. I'm a big practical effects proponent, because for me it's so true that the things that stick with me the most in films are the things that come from practical effects. Whereas if I see a creature that is supposed to terrify me in a movie, if it's a practical effect, perfect example, The Thing.
Oh yeah.
Or The Fly.
Oh yeah.
The Thing and The Fly, watching clips of that as a kid is still sticks with me till this day as something that's horrifying. Whereas if I watch a VFX of a creature or VFX
Or the new thing.
the new thing, right? It's not. It's creepy, but I'm like, it's digital. Like I can tell it's digital. What do you think of his obsession with practical effects and the fact that he's kind of made a name for it? I mean, he's won Oscars for it. Pan's Labyrinth won
production
design and makeup and all that.
Makeup, yeah.
They actually won that, and they gave all the credit to him because that comes from his brain, and that comes from his genius. Like his genius is. If anything is going to make Guillermo del Toro live in the memory of anyone, it's that. It's the fact that he uses practical effects and practical design so well. What do you think of that aspect of it?
No, I agree. I mean, I think, to me, I'm a big fan of practical effects and practical makeup as well, because what it is, it's that tangibility. You can feel it, like you said, you can feel it in your skin. You can feel it by the touch. And, also just from from a cinematic standpoint, when you're watching something that's digital, no matter how good they get it, and sometimes they get it really good, but it's always hard to match that lighting just right to where it just feels like it's there. You know what I mean? Just like from a visual standpoint. And, of course, that's the whole uncanny valley with, computers and whatnot. And eventually we might get over that point. But to me, when I watch a movie, I like to feel like I'm watching a movie. I don't like feeling like I'm watching a video game or anything like that. And I think that's really where his films strive. I mean, you talk about Hellboy. I mean, my goodness, all of the Ron Perlman actually wearing all of that makeup, that gigantic, and he's actually ripped up like that too, like he's muscular, and it feels like this is a character, whereas opposed to something like the new Fantastic Four movie where they had Ben Grimm like in the CGI, and it was off, it just felt off, you know what I mean? So now I appreciate that. Something like Hellboy or something like Pan's Labyrinth or any of his movies, actually, just the way the emphasis is on the costuming and the makeup really makes the difference, and I think that's important. And you talk about spending a lot of money. Of course, it's an expensive process, and I know with Crimson Peak they actually built like a full house for that whole set, so that's which
is not cheap.
Yeah, it's not, it's so nice because it really. I mean, I can only imagine how good it is for the actors too, right? Because you actually are there. You're feeling the set. You're feeling the energy, the tone, the atmosphere. And I'm sure that helps get into character a lot better too. And even with the makeup and the costumes. So for me, it's an overall better product when we see directors implementing that stuff. So
yeah, absolutely. It's definitely an incredible process. And let's jump into Blade 2, just because I want to get into that movie quite a bit. Right. This was obviously this was his first big film. And it's crazy because a lot of people talk about Blade 2 in a sense of like, oh yeah, this was after he was known for Pan's Labyrinth and all that. And this is way before Pan's Labyrinth.
Oh yeah.
This came out in 2002. And Blade 2 has a very special place in my heart because I remember, I've probably talked about this a million times, but I'll talk about it again because guess what? We're doing Del Toro. Yeah. Blade is one of my favorite characters, and I remember so clearly as a kid watching the Blade movies, specifically Blade 2, when Blade 2 was coming out in 2002, and I was 11, somewhere around there. I'm bad at math. But and I remember so much. Obviously, my obsession with vampires comes back to the forefront, as it always does in this podcast. But it's one of those things where I was obsessed with Blade. Think about it this way. I broke it down to my friend. Blade is, he wears all black coats, black everything. Mm-hmm. He is a vampire, right? Mm-hmm. And he has a katana, a samurai sword, and he knows martial arts. Are you kidding me? It's basically saying Bruce Lee in a black trench coat with a katana, and he's a vampire. Bruh.
It's like they made it for Ace.
They made it for me. Like, it's literally me as a kid. What do you want to be as a kid? I want to be a martial artist, I want to be a vampire, and I want to wear all black and fight with a sword. Yeah. Hell yeah. Yeah. That's literally the epitome of, like, a little kid me is like, that's like 11-year-old me. Mm-hmm. And that's obviously why it has such a special place in my heart. But besides that, I really enjoyed the movie, and a lot of people say it doesn't hold up. I actually saw an article that said that it really doesn't hold up. I kind of disagree with that. I've seen it a few times. If you take it for what it is, Like, a lot of people don't get that kind of concept because they're, we get Logans and we get Dark Knights and all that. But if you take Blade 2 for what it is, which is that, a vampire who fights with a sword, like, it's not supposed to be taken in a very, like, amazing standpoint. It's supposed to be kind of over the top, kind of, insane in its scale and all that. But this movie's incredible, man. I mean, it has great action scenes. It has a great cast. Wesley Snipes delivers some great stuff. The premise behind it is so much fun. Like, the fact that it's vampires fighting a bigger vampire threat. The fact that it's Blade teaming up with other vampires. That, to me, is so much fun because we get to experience the kind of dynamic we have between someone who's known as a vampire hunter, right? That's what Blade is, to now working with vampires in order to save humanity, kind of thing. And besides that, the feel of Blade is so, it's me. It comes back to, like, what I love, the gothic, vampiric texture, and the fact that the old vampire, like the 700, 800-year-old vampire, is, like, living in this underground facility with, like, all these crazy extravagant things, and he's just this ancient vampire guy who looks like a creature, and I'm just like, hell yeah. I love every bit of it. But I just want to hear your thoughts on this movie, obviously, because this is my perspective.
Yeah, no, I mean, I enjoy the Blade franchise a lot. Wesley Snipes, my man, of course. Yeah. And, like, you're right, bringing in the team aspect really helps. And I think, kind of shifting the tone a little bit, making it less about slaying other vampires and more about kind of unity and a united front to face off against this bigger threat. I think that's really great. And I think it's obviously a clear evolution from the first film. Now we introduce more characters. It's a little more flair, a little more style. And I don't know. For me, when I was a little kid, I just remember that great scene when they were just, like, blasted by, like, the light when Homeboy, I can't remember his name, but
Ron Perlman?
No. It was probably, but I don't know. It was like that big, like, reveal of, like, everybody's, like, super, like, lit up, and then I don't know. I probably add that shot in during the, during the editing of this, but
I want to know what you're talking about.
Right. I'm losing it, man. But,
all right.
Yeah. But that to me is Blade 2. But there's a lot of great moments like that, right? Yeah. There's a lot of great big action sequences. There's a lot of big character moments, and that's where I think the movie shines. And this came out. 2002. So it was like, in between X-Men and the first Spider-Man movie, and we haven't really seen. This was really the first big budget comic book sequel of that new era of new comic book films. So to me, like, there's a lot of great in that movie. I haven't really rewatched it in a while. But, like, as a superhero fan and as just a Wesley Snipes fan, this is a great addition to that whole thing.
Yeah, I love this movie, man. To me, I love I love the idea of a team. Like, I've been obsessed with the idea of teams and team aspects, and I love the idea of a team bringing different dynamics. That's what the X-Men is. That's what so many different teams that are great teams do. And I love the fact that you have a Donnie Yen, the fact that you have a Ron Perlman, the Donnie Yen being the quick martial arts guy, Ron Perlman being the big muscular vampire who does, like, giant guns and stuff, or you have someone like I think his name is Warhammer, but the guy with the Warhammer type thing, and you have all these different aspects of a team dynamic, and the fact that you have Blade working with him, and the fact that you have one of the best scenes in this movie is the underground scene when they're facing off with all the Uber vamps, with all the Reapers, and they're, like, running away from them, and they're, like, in the subway. I'm obsessed with, like, tunnels and, like, all tunnel stuff. For me, that's cool. Aliens did it great. I think the Hunger Games movie did a really cool scene with that, and
Catching
and Mockingjay Part 1.
Right.
I think it's Mockingjay Part 1 or Part 2. It could have been. I think it was Part 2,
actually.
Part 2,
at the end of Part 2.
That was dope. Like, that to me, remember that scene?
Yeah,
with
where
the
they're, like,
in the tunnels, and they're, like, looking
looking for the alien, kind of, like, the xenomorph looking kind of deal.
And that's straight out of Aliens. And guess what? They do it in Blade 2, too, where they're, like, in the tunnels with the guns. They have the light thingy that, if you shine the light on them, it'll explode them because vampires are allergic to light. And they have the guns, and they're all looking around and looking for vampires that are, like, on the ceilings and stuff. Like, that's so cool to me. That's, like, that's straight out of like Aliens for me, and that's something that I've always loved. I think that's a great scene, and I will always call back to the scene where they're like going into the nightclub, and they're walking out in slow motion in a straight line, and they're walking in slow motion, looking all cool, and they're walking out to Mos Def, and Mos Def is playing in the background.
Yeah.
And then the guy up the top of the roof is looking down, and he sees like he goes through his night goggles vision, and he sees that Blade is the only one that has warm blood or that's alive, basically, because vampires are dead. That scene is freaking dope. Like me as a kid, I'm just like, yo, that's my shit. That's my shit right there. Like roll up with your squad, like all black on black, wearing sunglasses and stuff, with the gun and your sword in the back. Dude, that for me is just so much fun. That's the embodiment of fun for me, and that's why this movie will always have a place in my heart. And I honestly do feel like it's a good movie too. I'm not just saying that because I'm like it's got cool stuff, but I actually feel like it's cool.
And I think that's really what's cool about Guillermo del Toro as a director is that he's able to make films. You know, he's not trying to like make fun of anything. He's not trying to like satirize. He's not trying to go like postmodern with his stuff. He really is just making the films that you want to see. Yeah. We're gonna talk about Pacific Rim and Crimson Peak, but those movies like Crimson Peak is unabashedly a gothic horror movie, straight from like the 1950s, 1960s, you know, and it doesn't make any excuses about it. Same thing with Pacific Rim; it's just unabashedly a monster movie,
a kaiju anime movie. It's basically anime.
Yeah, and Blade 2 is unabashedly a superhero movie, you know, and it is not trying to make fun of it. It's legitimately having a good time with these characters and making sure that, you know, of course the stakes are super high and super on point, but you're still having fun with it. So
sure, yeah, that's the most important thing for me. And it's actually got last thing I'll say on it, it's got one of my favorite callbacks in movies. I just think it's funny.
Yeah,
and, it's one of those things where he fights a vampire in the very beginning of the film, and I think he lets him get away or something. I forget. It's been a little bit since I've seen it, but he's like, you know, I'm gonna come back for you, bro. And he's like, and he runs away. And at the very, very end of the movie, we see that same vampire, and he walks into like this. I think it's a strip club or something. And he's like, I'm about to see some honeys. And he walks in, and Blade comes out, and he's like, I remember I told you I'd come back for you, bro. And he's like, no, and he kills him at the very end. I'm like, dude, that's great. That to me is just hysterical. The fact that it's like he told one vampire a long time ago, after all this crap, he's like, I'm gonna kill you, man. I told you I'd kill you, bro. And it's like, damn, dude, can't give me a break, man. But that's one of my favorite callbacks in the movie. And I again, this is the embodiment of me. Like all that martial arts, black on black, vampire, that stuff to me is like so much fun. And I love it, right? Let's jump into Hellboy, the first Hellboy.
Of course.
He directed both of these. Let's talk about both of these.
Yeah.
Hellboy 1 and Hellboy 2, two very different films. Very different.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, there's things that are serious and things that are fun and funny in both of these. But I feel like, I don't know, which one do you think has tonally wise, they feel very different. And obviously, budget wise, they're very different too, because the second one has got, you know, huge sets and huge budget. But I feel like this is a movie, the Hellboy franchise is something that people enjoy because it has such a good formula. It has a very good formula of a character that you feel for and you can relate to, and at the same time, enough emotion and enough heart behind that character, yet enough over-the-top moments and over-the-top humor and over-the-top elements that you can get from a Ron Perlman Hellboy. What are your thoughts on the franchise in general? For first of all, for Hellboy, like both of the films.
Right. I mean, I remember when Hellboy 2 came out, being a little kid. Me and my cousin used to argue a lot about movies, right? So, like, I remember, like, 2000, for example, 2007. This is kind of going off tangent, but 2007, Pirates of the Caribbean 3 came out, and the first Transformers came out, right? For me, I was like, yo, we gotta see the first Transformers. For him, he wanted to see Pirates of the Caribbean 3. You know, one is good, one is garbage. I'll let you decide which is which.
Or both are garbage.
Listen, but to me, so for me,
the first Transformers is all right.
I'm the Transformers kid. So for me, and we had the same exact argument with with Hellboy and Hellboy 2. For me, Hellboy 2 is the better movie because it's more action. It's more like over, you know, it's more, I think it's more understanding of his tone.
Yeah.
No, for me, the first Hellboy is kind of serious, and so the moments where he's like stalking his girlfriend and all that stuff never really gelled with me.
Sure.
On that front, but for the second one, I feel like it had a more comic book Philly kind of tone, a more action hero kind of tone. So then it worked a lot more in that sense for me. But yeah, to me, the second one. But I enjoy both of them, and the first one incorporates a lot more of the coolness that I like about the Hellboy series.
Sure.
Like the weird monsters, the creatures. It was going for like an H.P. Lovecraft kind of influence with the giant squids and the tentacles and all that stuff. Like, you know, I love all of that stuff, and I think the second one does that really well. But the second one has some really cool action sequences, man. It has the great, like, the sword fighting.
Oh, don't get me started.
All of it.
Don't get me started with the Prince. The Prince guy, I forget his name. I'm going to look it up right now. But,
yeah.
Bro, literally, if you want to say, why is Hellboy 2 better than Hellboy 1? If someone asked me that question, if you asked me that question, I'd just be like, bruh.
Yeah.
Them martial arts scenes, though.
Yeah.
That Prince, bro, with the spear, that thing is the coolest freaking weapon, like, ever. That thing is like, it's a spear, it's a sword, and it expands, and it comes, and it never breaks. It's like a part of him, right?
Right.
Where it's literally like, almost like alive. That weapon is so freaking cool. And that first scene where, and I'm a big martial arts guy, so one of the big things in all martial arts cinema and in all martial arts is I don't know if there's a term for it, but I'll probably make something up for it. But it's always the measuring is what it is. It's basically establishing where this person is on a spectrum of 1 through 10 in the martial arts level, right? Or 1 through 10 in where everyone else is and where he's at, right? Because you get different fights in the movie. You have Hellboy. I'm talking about Hellboy 2, by the way. You have Hellboy fight the big guy in the underground city, the marketplace. Remember that guy?
Yeah.
With the metal hand that goes and it pops out and it comes back. You have him fight that guy. Where does the Prince level as far as this guy, right? So they give you that by his first training montage. And it's just him spinning around and doing crazy tricks. And I'm like, I'm sold. This guy's a badass. Let's go.
Right.
This guy can keep up with Hellboy. I'm down. I'm down, dude.
But it's the same kind of thing with Blade too, right? I mean, the first Blade was more kind of a straightforward, like just kind of comic book movie, or a comic book adaptation, but still kind of fitting into like the '90s action feel.
Sure.
But then when Guillermo jumps in, it's like, no, we're going balls to the walls, like throwing it nonstop to it. And again, I think the martial arts aspect of it, I think, you know, it's beautiful and kind of also incorporating an Eastern design palette too, and production design wise, because we get to see a lot more like Asian influenced like artwork and like all of these different, you know, cultures that are being represented. You know, you're talking about a Hispanic director bringing like the style and the fluidity of the camera from like the Mexican standpoint, but also like the Asian influences as well. It to me is like, it's cool. You know, it's interesting to see that, man. And you don't see that match. You know, obviously a lot of American directors bring their own thing to it, but having Guillermo have like those big sweeping camera moves and the nice, like, you know, the nice choreographed way that it cuts with when they're having like the sword fight. In that one sequence where it's like double doing it, I'm just like, dude, that's you know, that's awesome.
What do you think about it when it comes to the first one? Because it's kind of, you haven't seen the first one in a minute, right?
I haven't seen it in a minute, no.
But you know, looking back at it, because I saw it, I think I saw it like a couple months ago, but again, it's all blurry because I saw the second one. I rewatched the second one like 2 months ago.
Yeah.
So not too long ago. What do you think of the lead being the bright-eyed and bushy-tailed kind of rookie guy who kind of jumps into this crazy world? We almost kind of see it through his eyes in the first one.
Yeah.
Right?
It's
Instead of seeing it through Hellboy's eyes, we kind of see it. I mean, you can make an argument for both, but we kind of see it through his eyes. I forget his name in the movie. John Myers.
Right.
His name in the movie. And it's basically like the really well-meaning white guy who comes in and he's like, hey guys, oh crap, this world is crazy, and he like finds out like what's going on and all that, as far as like the investigation place. And what do you think of seeing the world of Hellboy through his eyes?
Well, it's like, it's like the gateway in, right? Like that's how you know, his reactions are kind of the way the audience will react to a lot of this stuff. So I think it makes a lot of sense. But you know, it's very much like the Men in Black effect, right? Like you kind of have to have a dude who doesn't really know what's happening, just so
exposition.
Yeah, yeah.
We can explain what's going on to him.
Exactly. And you watch the first Hellboy. I mean, I love it, but there's a lot of exposition in there.
But then again, you could say that about pretty much all of Guillermo del Toro's films.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I feel like that's weird too, because I think that when he's doing more like Spanish language stuff, there's not a lot of exposition, but when there's a lot of American, and I guess in a way when there's a lot more money on the line, there needs to be like a little more explanation for what's happening and whatnot.
For what the world is and all that.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But I think it's also cool that they incorporated a lot of like stuff from the past and how that incorporates into this world, like the World War II stuff, the Nazi stuff.
Sure,
is interesting as well. So
I want to bring something up to you as well. Is the fact that talking about the World War II stuff and talking about that, the fact that the kind of idea of this film, because my brother, literally, this was Thanksgiving break, so he asked me like last week, was talking to me about Hellboy because we were playing Injustice. Which is the video game.
Too, right?
He's in it, right? Okay. So my brother and I were playing, and he's like, "Who do you want to play with?" And I'm like, "I'll play with Hellboy." And I played with Hellboy for a bit, and he's like, because he doesn't really know about Hellboy, and he's like, "Who is this guy?" And I'm like, "Oh, so basically, it's this demon who gets raised by this man who's a scientist, who's kind of a God-fearing man, but he's also kind of, I don't know, I don't know who Hellboy is, but it's kind of the concept of the fact that it's a demon and it looks like a demon and it's scary like a demon, and it's got the visual appearance of something so evil, right, and demonic, and yet it's a good guy. It's a guy who's obviously not, like a super nice guy, but he's still a good guy. Still fights for the side of good because of who his dad was, because of who raised him. The idea of like, if you take a demon out of hell and he's raised by good parents, turns out to be a great guy. But what do you think of that kind of concept, of the fact that it's like a demon raised by, especially in the second Hellboy, we see that a little bit, because at the beginning of the film we see him as a kid, and he's just like, the dad's like, "Come on, son, you must blah blah blah," and then he's like, "Come on, dad," and he's just a regular kid, even though he looks like a demon,
right?
And it's the idea of like, Hellboy 2 talks about like he's destined to do evil things, and he's destined for so much evil greatness and so much destruction, and he's destined to like destroy the world or whatever. And yet he comes from a background of such a great upbringing and such a genuinely good people, or a good person, which was his father, his adoptive father. The idea of raising someone who's evil or bad, or in the sense of like, your upbringing is who you are, instead of like what you are is what you are. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah,
right?
no, exactly. And I think that they play on that by just the fact of him just shaving his horns, right? He's doing that so he could film. I think that's kind of funny though. if you're gonna shave, while you're shaving, you're not gonna, nobody's gonna think you're not a demon, right? But he shaves his horn. He tries to fit into the human, like American society, but he still feels like an outsider just because of the way he looks, and of course, and because of the way he looks, he also has a certain expectation, like you're talking about. He's meant to be doing these terrible evil things, but he wants to fight on the side of good just as much as anybody else, and he kind of he plays the role of the anti-hero too, but it's a little, because
he's not like he's not Superman, where he's like the super, or Spider-Man, where he's more of like a character who like has both aspects,
right. He's a little more morally ambiguous when it comes to his version of fighting crime, I guess, but so that's where you're right on the money, though. It is like that, he's trying, because of his background, because of the way he was raised, it's more than just the way he looks. It's, don't judge a book by its cover, basically.
Kind of, that's kind of the whole idea, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, this guy looks like a demon, shoot him, and it's like, no, wait, he's a good guy, and he's here to help you, right? Let's jump into Hellboy 2 a little bit more. What I like about Hellboy 2 is that they expand a little bit more on Ape Sapien. Doug Jones. Doug Jones is going to be a running theme in all the Guillermo del Toro films. The fact that he's in a lot of them, especially in creature designs. This guy's known for being in special effects makeup. He's like an expert in special effects.
He's like the Andy Serkis of practical.
Yes, that's a great way of putting it. Holy crap, that's genius. But yeah, he's basically known for that, and he's able to essentially play like this played up version of himself, because he kind of is Ape Sapien. But Ape Sapien in the first movie, you're like, oh, that's cool. In the second movie, you're like, yo, this guy's dope.
Yeah.
Like the way he fights. Remember, did you see that scene when he fights the big guy in the second movie? That was dope. Like I was like, oh crap, he can move. Like he's actually like useful.
As a character actor, his movements, just like in the way he moves his body and stuff, is like almost like dancing, you know what I mean? Like, it's very elegant in the sense that it feels tangible and real, but it's still like creep.
Because
like,
he's such a bizarre looking guy in real life, because he's so skinny and so lanky and so long and elongated that he has that look perfectly set for creatures and creature designs. And he's so theatrical in his movements. Like he's a very theatrical guy. He's not a subtle, like he doesn't move robotically. He moves very, like you said, dance. It's very theatrical fluidity of moving that when he's in that special effects makeup, you buy it. You're like instantly like, yeah, this guy is very elegant in his movement and theatrical in his movement, that you buy that. But I like that Hellboy 2 was able to make his character a little bit more interesting. And obviously he has a love connection to the princess or the queen. I forget her name. I'm going to expand this a little bit more, but he has that connection to her, and that's kind of the basis of the movie. And sorry, I'm just trying to look up her name. But what do you think of him, of them giving him more to do in the second movie, basically? Because he becomes a plot. He becomes part of the plot a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, again, that's the natural evolution of a good sequel, is highlighting the characters that were like sidelined before and kind of bringing them more to the forefront. And I think that's a really good dynamic that him and Rob Perlman have, man. Like the interactions that they have, just overall, yeah. I mean, it works, especially in the universe that they created.
Sure.
For this movie. So
sure. And I want to bring up the villain of this movie, who's the prince, Prince Nuada. You know what I took out of it, besides me loving his freaking martial arts and all that. But I took a lot, like, this guy is a guy who you can kind of buy into as being I thought he was a dope villain because of the fact that he wasn't mustache twirling. He wasn't a mustache twirling villain. He was a villain who was, it's more about his people, and it's more about his race of people, and it's more about his obsession with succeeding and not being pushed down and stepped upon because of his looks or because of... It's like, basically, it's like a creature coming from greatness, and he's so used to coming from a world of like where he's royalty, and now he's forced to live underground and live in the sewers and live as if he's some sort of, you know, lesser being to humanity. So he wants to come out and get rid of humanity so he can bring about peace for his people, kind of thing. I thought that was actually really well handled, and the way he talked to Hellboy after they killed the giant green creature, the green god. Remember the green... You recently saw this movie. So remember the green giant creature who's like spewing out flowers and stuff? And he tells Hellboy, he's like, you know, is this what you want for humanity, to just kill something that they think is, you know, creature and otherworldly, so it deserves to die, even though it's beautiful in what it is? I thought that was a very interesting aspect of the movie. The fact of, you know, X-Men does it better, but it's the idea of different being put down or villainized or seen with different eyes. And no matter how Hellboy tries to look like a human or act like a human, he's still not a human. He's still very much visually disturbing. And how the second movie is all about him coming out to the public spotlight and being seen as like, who is that guy? Shoot him. And it's like, well, I just saved your baby. It's like, you touched my baby. It's like, it's supposed to be like what people take in, what humanity takes in visually. They don't understand what's actually going on in the inside of a person, right?
Right.
It's something they see as disturbing.
Right. And you can even go as far as to relate that to, you know, real, you know, racial conflicts in United States.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. It's the allusion to the fact that we don't understand what the other represents, or we're not taking the time to start asking the other side or the other races or minorities what they feel, or talk to them and stuff like that. So I think that's something that they capitalize here on really well.
I think anytime a villain comes from a real place like that, I think it's great. I think it's obviously my favorite, and I always bring him up, but Magneto, the way he comes from a real place of like, nah, trust me, what I'm doing isn't wrong. What I'm doing is like, finally, finally someone's got to do what I got to do.
Yeah.
Because someone has to get their hands dirty in order to open up doors for their people, kind of thing, right? And that's why I liked Prince Nuada in that film quite a bit. Following Hellboy, you finally get Pan's Labyrinth, and this is obviously Pan's Labyrinth is before Hellboy 2, and again, it takes place in this 5 years after the Spanish Civil War, and I like that it's obviously a Spanish-speaking film with a very Spanish accent, because I was watching the movie and I'm like, man, those Spanish accents, man, they're gnarly, dude. Because what's great about these movies is obviously Spanish is my first language, so I can watch the movie and I can enjoy it in Spanish, and I don't have to be obsessed with the subtitles. One of the perks of being Latino.
Right.
But El Laberinto del Fauno is obviously the title in Spanish. And it's crazy because this movie is still regarded as his best ever. Obviously, we haven't seen Shape of Water, but even people who have seen it still say Pan's Labyrinth is his best ever. I want to hear more about your thoughts on what this movie means to you, because Pan's Labyrinth is a pretty expansive film and it touches on so many different themes.
Right.
And I rewatched this one on Saturday, so I obviously have it fresh in my head, but I want to hear your thoughts first on just the meaning of this film.
Right. I mean, there's so much to dive into when you look at this film. I mean, the idea of war and fascism. Of course, like you said, it takes place 5 years after the Civil War, and the Captain Vito is kind of a hyper fascist, really. I mean, he even goes as far to say, like, these people think they're equal to us, like, and again, that's some real fascist ideology. They're only handing out one ration card per household, which is, you're killing your own people. And he's only really still involved in the war, even though it's 5 years after, because he just wants to scout out like the last rebels. He's clearly outnumbered. He's clearly like, it's a losing fight, but he just wants to hold forth in his thing. And unfortunately, that's the case, because of Captain Vito. He's, Ophelia, our main character, she's kind of caught in the middle of that, right? And it's really her story, but it's also the story of her mother and the story of Mercedes as well. And we get to know more about.
Who's a great character. Yeah. I think she's great.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really where, this movie is kind of a feminist representation, kind of comparing this to The Devil's Backbone, which, you can compare the two because they're both Civil War kind of inspired.
They're both period pieces.
Pieces, yeah, and both set during Civil War, Spanish Civil War times. And, but that movie's more about masculinity, more about courage and responsibility. This movie's more about like motherhood and self-sacrifice and going as far as to say that, the traditional set of like obedience that we're made to stick to, is that really worth it? And of course that's even the big case with women, because they're, a lot of times women are forced to be submissive or obedient to the standards that men implement. This movie kind of breaks a lot of that. And, the doctor represents that. The doctor character, I can't remember his name off the top. But Mercedes is somebody who disobeys the captain multiple times. Ophelia is, of course, like that too. She breaks the rules to the fawn, for the captain, for everybody.
To the pale man.
To the pale man, yeah.
I can't lie though, I kind of get mad at that scene. Like, why though? They told you not to do it.
Yeah, and it's funny. That's a lot of people's criticism with the film, that one scene is so kind of out of character for her, I guess. Sure. But it's the first step of understanding independence, right? You have to break the rules sometimes, especially as a maturing kid becoming, this experience is essentially turning her into an adult because of all the challenges she's facing in the real world and in the fantasy world that she's exploring. But this movie is so deep, man. And it's so deep. Yeah, and like I said, the feminism and that one scene where she's opening the book and she sees like the blood. At first it's like a uterus, and then it kind of explodes in blood, and then it's leading off into the mother. The mother almost having that miscarriage moment. So there's a lot good in it. What I want to ask you though is, there's that whole argument of, is Ophelia's journey real or is it not real? Is it objective or subjective? Big question. Yeah. So the movie paints it in a way that still kind of makes us wonder. I mean, what are your thoughts though? Like,
that's so tricky, man. It's so tricky. I can't lie. Rewatching it makes me feel like, to be honest, I'm okay with both. But rewatching it makes me feel like, yeah, she probably did imagine all this stuff as a way of a coping mechanism through what what was happening in the real world kind of thing, and the fact that she did have her, she was constantly head and a nose in a book, in a fairy tale, and then she had a very fantastical imagination, so she possibly did imagine all this stuff that went on. Then again, if everything we see is actually there, as far as in the physical sense, as far as production design, if there's a giant hole in the ground,
Yeah.
did no one else think to go down in that hole? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Because in the center of the maze, they have the hole.
Mm-hmm.
So I think to myself, maybe there is something down there that maybe when people go down there, they just didn't see anything.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe when she went down there, she was able to see it because she is a princess.
Right.
I love how her name is Princess Moana in this film too, by the way.
Oh yeah.
Did you
yeah.
notice that?
Yeah.
I'm like, Moana, hey! It's a callback.
Even naming her
Ophelia.
Ophelia, yeah. Even naming her Ophelia is a homage to like Shakespeare's Hamlet, right? The main character, the main female character in that, who is kind of challenged between the two worlds of in the Shakespeare play of the father and the brother versus her love, and whether or not it's kind of flipped in that story, where in that story is more of the father and the brother want her to be more obedient, and she wants to kind of not kind of be independent, but then that's also like a bigger question too, is just being an obedient kid, like with like just does that make a independent person an independent woman, or does being disobedient and having your own thoughts and doing all that, is that more important? Like that's kind of the question.
That's the whole idea of the fascism mentality, right?
Yeah,
is the fact
right.
of the obedience versus disobedience versus questioning the authority, questioning authority,
Right.
Where it's a necessary thing to question who is giving the order and what their thought process is behind that order, right? It's the scene with the doctor where he says,
I have the quote right here, where exactly what he says.
Go ahead.
He says, but Captain, to obey just like that for obedience sake without questioning, that's something that only people like you do.
Yeah, and it's funny because I remember that because that's the English translation. And
Yeah.
what's great is that in Spanish, he says, if I can read it real quick, because I remember hearing it in Spanish, and it says, to obey just like that for obedience sake, sin pensarlo. Sin pensarlo. You can translate it as without questioning, but sin pensarlo, because he says sin pensarlo means without thinking about it. He says pensar means think. And so it essentially is like without using your brain, without thinking about it, without actually having a thought process behind it.
Like subconsciously.
Exactly. So that's why I love the translation, because without questioning is a great translation, but also sin pensarlo can mean without thinking about it, or without a thought.
Yeah.
And that's what's so good, because the whole theme of the film is to say, I'm going to use my head, I'm going to use my own thoughts and my own ideas to make a decision about your decision, to make a decision about what you tell me to do, about what you think obedience is and what I think obedience is, and what you think is correct in this world and what I think is correct in this world.
Right.
So obedience for obedience sake, without thinking or without questioning, is something that's not human. It's not human. That's something that, it shouldn't be regarded as human thought process, because we have logic and we have thoughts and we have ideas, and we should use our intelligence to decipher what is good and what isn't. Right? That's what's so good about that quote, because it's the entire theme of the movie, of obedience and not. And it's also at the end of the movie when she has her little brother, and he says, you promised to obey me. You promised to obey me. Are you going to really disobey me? And she's like, yeah, I'm going to disobey you because you're not going to take my little brother.
Yeah.
It comes back around from the fauno to the captain. The fact that no matter what, when someone gives you an order that is evil, you have the choice to not obey that order, even if it's going to cost you your life.
Right.
That's such a good theme that you see in this movie. It's so good.
And you know what? And that's where it subverts a lot of the stuff is taking from, because a lot of the traditional fairy tales and fantasies that is aping from is all about obedience, right? Like the Sleeping Beauty has to wait until the prince wakes her up. Snow White has to tend to seven men, seven short dudes, So But for this movie, it's like, no, the key is disobedience. You know, the key is not subjecting yourself to what the standards are and kind of standing up for your own authority and what's right for you. So I think that's really fascinating. And you know, and kind of talking about the references, they reference so many cool, like different. You know, obviously it's like Alice in Wonderland, the whole setup. You know, the red shoes that she wears at the end, wears the vase. But even like with the captain, his whole thing with the clock. It's kind of like a very nice little reference to the Peter Pan stuff, right? With Captain Hook, how he's obsessed with time. And even if you go into like the captain's office, the production design, and this was brilliant about it, the production design makes it look like you're inside of a clock.
Oh,
right? So,
okay,
like,
cool.
That's what, yeah, a lot of like nice little touches like that. And the fairies, I mean, you're talking about more Peter Pan, the fairies, you know, resemble the Tinkerbells and all that stuff too. So, you know, a lot of really cool elements that they bring in to tell like this really grandiose fantasy tale, but almost for adults, you know, like exclusively for adults almost, you know. Like no kid should be watching Pan's Labyrinth because it's very mature. And you know, we're going back to the question of if it's real, if it's fantasy, one of the supporting points to that is how clearly the Pale Man represents is like a direct metaphor for the captain, right? Like how he's like, you know, with him sitting at the end of the table with the feast, the same way that the captain sits at the end of his table. And of course, you know, when the captain is torturing somebody, he punches them in the eyes, whereas the Pale Man has to pick up eyes and use his hands, you know. So it's, you know, it's a very clear homage to that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think that's, you know, but to me, I've always interpreted it as is real only for the fact that the only question that is not happens when when the captain is like being sedated and he's about, you know, he's been poisoned at that point. Like, so to me, it's almost like maybe he doesn't see it because he's so sedated under the medication that she put in his drink or whatever. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm just pulling at strings here, but I mean, I don't know. You're right. It could work either way. I just like to think that Ophelia's journey wasn't just some imaginary, like, you know, right before she died, she imagined the whole movie. You know, I really hope it wasn't that, but I could see, you know, but I could see it working just as effectively that way too. So
sure. Yeah, no, it's a great movie, and it has so many themes that it gets into, and it's funny because we haven't even talked about some other themes of like the fantasy aspect and the fairy tale aspect. I mean, we talked a little bit about it, but essentially it is a different brand of a fairy tale, and it goes back to Guillermo del Toro himself being obsessed with fairy tales. Like he's obsessed with the idea of a fairy tale. And pretty much all his movies have fairy tale elements in them. And the fact that fairy tales, we always talk about style over substance, right? But fairy tales are meant to be very stylistically
challenging, like
but also stylistically thematic.
Oh, right.
It's much more thematic than it is subtle and small and quiet and intricate. It's much more big, large, in your face, you know, Sleeping Beauty or Snow White. It's big themes of beauty or of image or of you know, all this stuff that comes into fairy tales. That's the kind of stuff that Guillermo del Toro puts in all his films, pretty much.
Right.
Any last thoughts on Pan's Labyrinth before we move on?
No, I mean, like I said, this is one of my favorite movies of all time, you know. So for me, you know, revisiting this film as of like yesterday or today, I forgot exactly when I watched it, but it was so powerful in seeing that how just from an aesthetic standpoint, like the whole way it's like the colors are arranged, like how it's when it's nighttime it's kind of dark bluish, and then when they're outside, and how the difference in color palettes represents the difference in the worlds, you know what I mean? And it's also kind of pretty much ahead of its time, you know, because now we see all the movies that are like red, like orange and blue. This was kind of a movie that did it, and it was shot on film. So
there you go. Let's move on to speaking of color. Pacific Rim.
Oof, very, very colorful.
Pacific Rim is a movie that a lot of people I wouldn't say divisive is the word, but I would say a lot of people have thoughts on the film as far as like it or don't like it, or as far as a good Guillermo del Toro film or not a good Guillermo del Toro film, especially following something like Pan's Labyrinth, which pretty much everyone can say is a really good film. Here comes a big blockbuster movie like Pacific Rim, where a lot of people don't really know where to rank it as far as Del Toro films. And here comes my opinion, which is I freaking love this movie. Like, this movie, I actually have it on Blu-ray. I recently bought it for my mom so my mom can see it because it has the subtitles. And I love this movie, man. I think it's the perfect amount of what you're trying to show in a movie, what you're trying to say. It's so over the top. It's so in your face. It's so fun. It's so it's so clearly what it is, if that makes any sense. It's very much in your face as far as what you're getting, and it has a blast in what it does. And I remember watching this film for the first time. I didn't see it in theaters when it came out. I saw it when it came out on Blu-ray, and I rented it. I remember renting this movie after it came out and seeing it alone in my house. I had so much fun watching this movie because I remember first watching the movie, the first 15, 20 minutes, and thinking, what is this? This is so like, ooh, I don't get it. And then I'm like, oh, it's supposed to be very like tongue-in-cheek, very kind of like over the top kind of way. And it's supposed to be very enjoyable in that way. And I love this movie. And if you see the behind the scenes of this, have you seen the behind the scenes of it?
Yeah.
Dude, the way he goes into like the thought process behind what he was doing, you really see how much of a genius this guy actually is. But again, it's a movie that I've talked about a lot on Schmoes, and I want to hear your thoughts on it because I'm usually in the minority of someone who loves this movie.
No, I love this movie too, man. Yeah. This is
good.
Yeah, this was one I actually did see it in theater. I saw it opening weekend. One of the only people in the theater. I saw it, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I saw it in IMAX 3D, which was so nice because to me, this is one of the best looking films we've seen in the past couple of years. Right?
Sure.
The way Guillermo del Toro uses the camera here, and a lot of times when the kaiju and the Jaegers, when they're fighting, a lot of times it's easy for a director to be like trying to shaky cam it up like some Transformer stuff, but he gives it like this big epic sweeping feel by making the camera kind of represent like how a news crew would kind of be shooting these events, right? Like from the overhead helicopters to the low angles where we really see the scope and the power of these giant creatures and these giant robots, and seeing it in 3D was like whoa, because like the 3D was so well done in this film. Whether it be the big moments with the Jaegers like putting their fist back and like punching towards the screen, that was great. Or even like the small moments where I forget the Asian characters. Mako, yes, yeah.
I think it's Mako.
Mako, yeah. Even like a small moment where she's waiting for the helicopter that Idris Elba is coming in on.
Oh yeah.
Just that beautiful like rain, like the rain shot, and she's holding the umbrella and the helicopter. Even seeing that in like IMAX 3D. That was worth the price of admission alone, just for that one shot. And I'm like, dude, this is genius. And she has that great backstory where she actually confronted the kaiju before when she was a little kid.
That scene is so like, for a movie that's so over the top and so kind of like tongue in cheek, kind of fun. Yeah. That scene is dark.
Yeah.
And it's like, damn, that's gotta suck.
Yeah.
Like just being a little girl in that scenario has got to be awful. So awful.
Right. And you can see the psychological wear and tear on her because she has a hard time matching with like the Charlie Hunnam character, and she has a hard time adapting to having a mental partner because she's had such a difficult time dealing with that. And Charlie Hunnam's character hasn't gone without his struggles either. I mean, he lost his brother in the opening of the film. So by doing that, you get an immediate connection to this guy, and like overall, you just get connections with everybody, with all these characters in this movie.
I love how he describes that too, because it makes it so much realer. Because obviously, seeing his brother die in that whole sense in the beginning of the film is very dark and all that stuff.
Right.
But when he says, he talks to Idris Elba about it in the movie, and he's like, dude, I was still connected to my brother. I was still in his head when that happened. So I felt how he felt. I was my brother dying,
Yeah.
It's like, crap. Can you imagine being inside someone as they're dying, like inside their head, right? Like the idea of like, I basically died too that day. Is it kind of what he was getting at? Where he's like, you know, the kind of trauma that you feel when not only you feel what the other person felt when they died. It's like, oh, that's so awful. It makes you feel so awful about that. But one of the aspects I like about this movie too, that I really, really liked, obviously besides Idris Elba because he's badass.
Oh yeah.
Is the idea of like the different countries and the different nations fighting together and all representing a different kind of Jaeger and in a different aspect of it, and yet it being like this united front. I love that. Like the fact that it's like, that's the Russian one, and it's like the big dude, and it's like, that's the Chinese guys, and they're all fast, and they got three guys. And that's the Australian guy, and they're all like cocky and punching people, and it's like, I love that. Like in the movie, watching that, I was like, crap, that's really freaking cool. I've always enjoyed the aspect of different nations having their own culture and their own design and their own aesthetic, and bringing that to something like this scenario, right, which is a world-ending kind of scenario, but also bringing their intelligence and their upbringing to save the world. I've always loved that because I'm a kind of person who loves culture and who loves different people's cultures. I'm fascinated by it, right? Where to me, it's something that I point out, and I'm very comfortable in pointing it out because it's something that I enjoy. And that's how my family is too, right? Where we can say, I love this aspect of Japanese culture, or I love this aspect of Chinese culture, or European or German or Russian or whatever it is, because they all bring something different to the table and something beautiful to the table, whether that be in art or whether that be in intelligence or in expertise. It's always cool to see that aspect of different nations. And that's something that I've always loved. What do you think about that part of the movie?
No, I think that's great. And I think that's essentially what they're going for. And having the cross brand of cultures, not just through the Jaegers, but through the actual connections of these people, right? I mean,
through the cast, right? Because you have Idris Elba, you have, her name is Rinko Kikuchi, playing Mako.
Who Academy Award nominated actress, by the way.
She's amazing. She's in one of my favorite movies of she plays Kirito the treasure hunter. I think not Kirito. I'm thinking of another one, but the treasure hunter is basically what the movie's called.
Oh, okay.
She's in that movie, but having the British guy, having Charlie Hunnam, even though Charlie Hunnam's British too, but having him play American. But having all those different kinds of cultures and different kinds of casts. What do you? That's such a great part. And I interrupted you, but go ahead.
No. That's what I was getting at too. Like the crossbreeding of all these different people coming together and having to learn this experience like all around, and you even see like the subcultures that develop in the world where there's kaiju and all that stuff. We get to see that through the eyes of the Charlie Day and Ron Perlman back in this movie. How if there was a world where giant kaijus were just getting like murdered, of course there'll be a black market salesman who's like selling off the parts and all that stuff. But there's that great scene where like Ron Perlman just gets eaten by the by the kaiju, and just when you thought it was dead, it was like just when you thought the mother was dead, turns out to be pregnant with a kid that comes to the life and eats this guy. I don't know, it was just hilarious to me. So there's a lot of cool scenes in that, and again with Charlie Day having that whole like subplot of film getting like mentally trying to link with a Jaeger, and that just ultimately ends up flipping on his head too.
And speaking of Guillermo del Toro is an expert in shooting and creating action sequences and creating amazing hand-to-hand combat with Blade 2, with Hellboy 2, and now with this one too, with Jaegers and with giant creatures and with kaijus and with gigantic beings clashing together, and seeing the fights in this movie are so freaking cool.
Oh yeah.
Like the fact, I think it's the middle fight where Gypsy Danger takes on a bunch of different kaiju, and it takes on the big fat one, the giant fat one, and it's just beating the crap out of it. And then it takes on the crazy bat one.
Yeah, that just pops out wings.
No, but when it's like dragging the boat.
Yeah,
and it's just like coming up all slow,
yeah.
and it's like, what up, dude? What's up? Are you about to get messed up? And it's like he's like dragging that giant freaking freighter ship, and he just swings it, and he's like, boom, and he swings it like a bat, like that moment, and then the moment, like you said. When it grabs onto him and then the wings just go and they pop out and it starts flying and you're like, oh shit! Like, dude, watching this movie was like watching like I personally watched the movie like I was watching like a sporting event or something where I was like, oh shit, oh shit, like I was going nuts because then it's like it's got wings, it's flying, oh my god, and then all of a sudden he's like, we have one more option. Sword! And it brings out the sword. And then she says it in Japanese. She's like, for my family! And then splits it in half. Oh, my bad. And then, like, splits it in half. And then it cuts out and they're falling. All that stuff to me was a blast. It was so much fun watching that. And for me, like, all those things that people were like, oh, that's so cheesy and that's so over the top. And I'm like, yeah, but it's fun and it's supposed to be over the top.
And most importantly is you can understand what's happening, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's so clear, like, the fights and the way that the characters move, and it's consistent too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you don't get all these different kind of crazy stuff. What it makes it feel like is that these things are normally how they go about fighting these giant kaiju. There's just more of them now, and they've been in the middle of the fight for I don't know how many years. But once this new threat starts to come up, now they're having to face the challenges and kind of unlock a bunch of new things that we hadn't seen before.
Absolutely. Even the third act, when Idris Elba gets in the ship and he's fighting off against the final level 5, category 5 kaiju in the underwater, like that scene's great too. And the fact that he like clings onto it and then escapes through the portal with Charlie Hunnam's character. Like all that stuff to me works so well. Like this is such a well-balanced movie as far as first act, second act, third act. And as far as the evolution of a kaiju, right? Where it's like they're sending in different waves and different categories and different level of creatures to test out the defense system of the world, right? Of humanity. Like all that stuff to me worked. Even the Charlie Day stuff with his doctor and the feud that they have going on. Like that stuff worked for me too. And it had the fun balance of over the top humor and serious world threatening moments kind of thing.
And I thought it was really cool just from a visual perspective. Again, we talk about practical effects. You know, all the times, of course, when they're outside and they're showing the kaiju and the robots fighting as CGI, but when they're actually inside of the ship, that's all practical.
And it looks good.
Yeah, it looks beautiful.
It looks really
good. The way it's lit, the way all of that's happening, it just looks it feels real because you're in with the actors and the characters, and the actors are really going through that. Like they're really being pulled and tugged and messed with the same way they would be if they were actually fighting a giant alien. So it's tangible.
That's also comes to the practical aspect of Guillermo del Toro in creating that. Another thing that this film brings up, and it'll should I save it for Crimson Peak? Well, it comes into Crimson Peak even a little bit more, so I'll probably save it for that. But yeah, I love this movie, and it's one of those things for me that seeing those behind the scenes and seeing Guillermo del Toro talk about everything that he thought behind this movie just made it even better for me, because I'm like, dude, he created a freaking world that's so big. It's not just in this setting, in this moment, in this specific time. It's such a big world that I really wanted to see him direct the second one, because I really like this movie. Like really, I love this movie. And the fact that we're not getting him is a little disappointing, and the fact that trailer was definitely not.
I agree with you.
Especially someone who's a Pacific Rim fan, and I'm like, oh, that's not Pacific Rim.
You know what's funny? You know what's funny? I feel like the Pacific Rim fans like me and you kind of saw that trailer and like, But like the non-fans were like, oh, that looks awesome. I'm like, I don't know.
Go watch the first one. It's cool. That one doesn't look cool.
It
looked like
a giant cartoon.
It looked like Power Rangers. No, but like the
new one.
The new one. The not good Power Rangers. Anyways,
but I still want to see it. And Guillermo del Toro is obviously a producer on it, so maybe it carries over. And Stephen DeKnight, he did the first 2 episodes of Daredevil, right?
And he did Spartacus, which is again one of my all-time favorite shows.
Right.
But this movie I think it's such a fun balance of a movie, and it's such a fun movie that works so well, and it has so many different aspects that work well in this movie that I thoroughly enjoy it.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on it?
I mean, nah. I mean, it's an awesome movie. I wish more people would have saw it, and those great moments we were talking about, seeing that in the theater was awesome too.
Yeah, one more thing I want to say that I forgot to mention was the fact that it did have such someone who grew up watching. As you can't see it right now in the shop, but I have a Gundam Wing poster. Someone who grew up watching Gundam Wing, as someone who's obsessed with Gundam Wing, as someone who had those Gundam Wing toys, seeing basically a Gundam Wing movie. Like, we haven't seen one, but this was obviously not Gundam Wing, but seeing a Gundam Wing type of movie, and seeing that kind of anime aspect behind the movie.
From the lighting too. The lighting is what really sells that influence. Because I always thought, like, damn, why don't more directors kind of adapt that animation style? Into but the way, again, going into the way they're lit and shot inside of those ships, I look something straight out of a Gundam Wing. Anime, yeah. So it's nice.
It's as someone who's an anime fan, it's a very anime movie, and that's why I liked it so much, because it does have that anime aspect and that giant mech suit kind of anime world feel that I really enjoyed in this movie quite a bit, and that's why, besides everything else I mentioned, that's another reason why it has such a special place in my heart that I freaking loved, and I love that Guillermo del Toro went there. Like, he went there. He's like, I'm going to go full anime, bro. Because anime, if people think anime is subtle, anime is not subtle. Anime is can be very over the top and very in your face. And that's kind of what Pacific Rim is.
All right. Personal question, right? 2014 Godzilla, 2013 Pacific Rim. Which one?
Oh, Pacific Rim, dude.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? I love Pacific Rim.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
all right.
yeah.
I respect that. Yeah.
I like Godzilla. It's not a bad movie, but Pacific Rim to me is just a blast. It's one of the most fun I've ever had watching a movie.
Yeah.
It's that good for me.
It feels more like a monster movie than the more recent Godzilla fare.
Sure.
I think. But I didn't. Well, never mind. I didn't like the 2014 Godzilla. So
I didn't mind it. It's all right to me.
Yeah.
But it's Pacific Rim's better.
It's better.
Definitely better.
But Crimson Peak is.
Let's move on to Crimson Peak.
Yeah.
Obviously, this is a movie that came out with a huge anticipation. Tom Hiddleston coming off the Tom Hiddleston mania that has swept the nation and swept the world.
Right.
You have Jessica Chastain. You have Mia. What's her name?
Alice in Wonderland girl.
Yep. Yeah. You have her, Mia. I'll call her Mia. But basically, this movie was like, it was going to be a gothic horror, and it had an amazing look. And I mean, amazing, incredible look behind the movie.
Oh, yeah.
And the color behind this movie is so in your face, and it's so beautiful, and it's so visually stunning that a lot of people say this movie was kind of style over substance. And I'm curious, because this was a very divisive movie as far as people who liked it and people who didn't. What are your thoughts on this movie? I think it's 2015, right?
Yeah, 2015, yeah.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on Crimson Peak?
I love it, man.
Really?
I remember watching
Holy
this.
crap.
I watched this, another one, opening weekend in theaters. Just because, like, I love the visual style of it. I mean, they're going for, he talks about this is the most color correction he's ever done on
it is one of the most. I was going to bring up color in Pacific Rim, and that was the thing I said I wanted to wait for, Crimson Peak. The color in this movie is insane.
Yeah.
Like, it's insane, dude. As someone who notices the color in different film and the color in production design, it's amazing. It's amazing. But keep going, by the way.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree. And, they're going for that old, like, 60s, 70s, like, Hammer horror, like, old horror gothic style. And I think they really do that brilliantly with the way the film is colored, the bright reds, with the really dark and nasty blues, with the creepy, like, purples. I mean, all the different colors that they use in this is, like, very, very head-on, feels real nice, feels like it puts you right in the atmosphere and the tone that they're going for this movie.
Speaking of color, I was rewatching Blade 2 with a friend of mine, and that red clay color in this movie, the one that Tom Hiddleston is talking about when he's talking about the red clay, and the color of the ghosts in the movie, you know what color I'm talking about, right? Red, super, crazy, saturated red. Yeah. That, if there's one color to describe Guillermo del Toro as a whole, it's that freaking color.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of like this one, but it's a little bit more red, kind of like the red that's on my table, but a little bit more red, I guess you could say. But it's kind of in all his films. So there's a hallway scene in Pan's Labyrinth. It's in that. it's in Blade 2 when he's walking through the house that looking for the Reapers. I think it's the above house and above the nightclub. It's obviously all over this movie, but it's basically that color is so beautiful and it's so like it grabs you so much, and that's why I like that he made red is a big theme in all his movies, obviously, with Pacific Rim, with Pan's Labyrinth.
Even Pan's Labyrinth with that rose,
and blood too.
The blood, absolutely,
blood is blood of Ophelia, and also blood of in this movie. Blood. The one shot in this movie that I love is the shot when Mia's dad dies, Jim Beaver. You know what I'm talking about, right? When he gets his face smashed in
with the skull.
In the freaking sink. And then he falls down and there's the blood and the water washing down at the same time. That is so freaking like, it's jarring because you just saw an old man get his face smashed in. But it's also beautiful because you're like, man, that's like Guillermo del Toro in a hole right there. Just that shot is just so like colorfully mixed in and colorfully designed as far as the dark person coming in all black, pushing his face against the sink, exploding the head in all blood, and water kind of washing it around in a beautiful shot. That is gorgeous. It's amazing. And the way he uses that in Crimson Peak is genius. It's freaking genius, dude.
And especially exploring the themes they're exploring. I mean, obviously, this movie takes a lot from like the Jane or the Jane Eyre, the novel, and of course, funny enough, we talked about Beast of No Nation earlier. Cary Fukunaga also directed a Jane Eyre adaptation starring the main star of Crimson Peak, Mia
Wachowski.
There we go. Boom.
Is
boom.
it? I don't know.
Is it?
I'm gonna look it up.
All right.
Because I keep mispronouncing her name.
But she was also in Jane Eyre, and she's in this, which I think is a nice connection. But that whole like gothic romance, like inspired like the whole relationship with the brother and the Jessica Chastain, and her character, obviously. It all kind of falls in line with like this romance, this dark, seedy undertone with like these horror vibes to it too. So I mean, I know Guillermo del Toro has said in the past that this really wasn't like a direct horror movie. It really is like a gothic romance, and it fits into that square so well because you get a sense for the Victorian kind of era, the style, the costumes.
It's beautiful.
Yeah,
it grabs you. It literally takes you in and grabs you in its authenticity and in its texture and its realism, and it's just so freaking good. I love seeing this movie. You caught me watching it as you came in today.
Yeah.
And I'm just rewatching it. It's just like, damn, that is some like money right there. He put money into that stuff. And I talked to you a little bit about his production design. The production design in this is off the charts, like literally off the charts as far as like how big it is, how beautiful it is, how colorful it is, and how it's so grand in scale, and it takes you in, and it makes you feel like I'm watching something that's real. Like this really took place in this period. It's a period film, and so many period films struggle to incorporate everything that goes into making a period film. But this one really shows you that everything in this movie feels like it came out of that time period.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think especially the way it was photographed, we talked about the color and just the scarce lighting, the way there's that one beam of light coming through the house with the snowflakes that will fall through every now and then, or seemingly like snowflakes, there was so much good in this movie. I mean,
I'm surprised.
The candle lit and all that.
I thought I was gonna fight you on this, man. I was ready to fight because I kind of like Crimson Peak.
I love it,
and I feel like a lot of people don't like Crimson Peak.
Right, and then like we said, it's inspired by the Hammer horror era of that kind of horror film. Especially stuff that is very over the top and very stylized. That kind of makes sense that. I mean, I can get where critics are coming from too. Of course, the style is very heavy in this film, but I just think that the way it's adapting and is taking from its influences and incorporating that into the visual style while also mixing in this great element of classic literature when we talk about again Jane Eyre and all that stuff, and the ending outside set in the snow, The Shining, kind of takes from that as well. So again. looking at all of his influences, it makes sense how this movie kind of comes together
Sure.
from a visual standpoint, and taking the already strong emotional arc that's already there. To me, it works a lot of different levels. So.
Yeah, it's one of those things too for me that stylized is a word that people use sometimes negatively.
Yeah, yeah.
And visually captivating is another thing that people use negatively. But it's crazy how that's the way it is, considering that film is an art, and the basic premise of art is basically color. And the fact that Guillermo del Toro can literally make a movie essentially about color and just tell you a story through color, right? Where it's such a different way of doing a film and a different way of telling a story, where most people tell stories with dialogue, with plot, and with all that, and he can tell a story using color and using imagery and using visually captivating dresses and suits and production design and houses and stuff that you can only see through a visual eye, and you can only see through overt use of color and use of imagery and all that stuff. That it's such an interesting, different aspect of art that some people, I think, don't get, probably, and that's probably why a lot of people didn't like Crimson Peak. But the fact that he's able to do that, to me, is good enough on its own. It's good enough to stand on its own. Whereas, like, can you stand on a visual, atmospheric tone enough to tell a story? I think you can. If you do it the way a genius like Guillermo del Toro can, yes. If you do it in a way that you're probably not at Guillermo del Toro's level, which most people aren't, then no. But what do you feel as far as like visual storytelling, or visual storytelling in the sense of old school art? I'm talking like basic use of different lighting and different colors.
Right. Well, I think it depends on what you go to the movies for too, right? I mean, for me, I go to the movies kind of for the visual stimulation, for the experience, for the sound design, for all the technical elements. But of course, I'm always going to enjoy a great story and a great characters in that too. But some people want to see more of like the writing side of it. How strong are these characters? How strong are these people? How strong is the story? And how strong is the acting? I mean, a lot of people go to movies for a lot of different things. But for me, when I watch a Guillermo del Toro movie, especially a movie like this, I get the emotion, I get the sense of dread and the sense of dourness through the visuals, right? And that's largely due to the color, especially in this movie, where the atmosphere is set. Where there'd be like a dark blue kind of lit kind of area, or like we talking about the red clay, like that kind of dread, that kind of nastiness. You're in that environment just from the way the film looks and it's designed and it's shot. And the way it sounds, I mean, we're not even talking about the sound design in this movie.
And that's something that we didn't talk about for Guillermo, who's an amazing expert in sound design.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Pan's Labyrinth has that great moment where she's confronting the giant frog creature. I forget what it's called.
Yeah.
But it just sounds nasty, and then when he like spits himself out, like it just yeah. And Pacific Rim too, and even Blade 2 has like some really nice ways of incorporating the sound elements and all that stuff. So, but yeah, and in this movie, so for me, I get that through the technical aspect. So when people say style over substance, for me, I mean, of course there are movies that are like all style, no, nothing surface, under the surface, talk about Michael Bay or whatever. But with Guillermo del Toro, the style is the substance. They're hand in hand, and I think that's what great filmmakers are capable of doing.
And the visual is the story, and the color is the story. He even talked about that in Pacific Rim in the behind the scenes. I don't know if you saw this one or remember him saying this, but he said, I want to tell a story using color. You imagine that? That's how much of an expert he is on color and on visuals, is the fact that he's able to tell you something and make you feel something just through a certain lighting of a different shade of a different color. That is called an artist. That's an artist. And that's what I love about this movie the most, obviously. And the fact that that's kind of what the point of the movie is to take you inside that world using the visual atmospheric sense of the movie. And the tone and the gothic feel of the movie is captivating, to say the least. Really enjoy that for sure.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts on Crimson Peak before we jump into questions?
No, I mean that's pretty much it. I wish more people would have seen it when it came out. That was a great motion picture.
Yeah, and it definitely wasn't cheap.
Yeah.
This was a movie that had like 3 or 4 people as like its lead cast, and it cost like a lot of money.
Well, I mean, look at the stars. I mean, Tom Hiddleston, Jessica Chastain, Miss Mia, whatever her name.
Mia Wasikowska.
Yeah. There we go. And of course, it's gonna price tags gonna be it. But I again, it's a movie that I thoroughly enjoyed. I think it is a work of art, and I hope more people will end up discovering it sometime down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those movies that I think people should give a second chance as well.
Right.
Shout out to Jim Beaver, I'm sorry, who plays the dad of Mia Wasikowska.
Oh, okay.
He also plays Bobby in one of my all-time favorite shows, if not my all-time favorite show, Supernatural. Anytime I see a Supernatural actor, I'm gonna give him a shout out. That's how hardcore I am.
We were watching The Disaster Artist.
And we were watching The Disaster Artist. I'm gonna say it for you because I just get so excited. And freaking they're watching Gilmore Girls, and Jared Padalecki comes out, who plays Sam in Supernatural. And I literally turned to RB3 and I'm like, yo, that's my boy Jared.
Yeah.
Yo, that's my boy Sam from Supernatural. And I'm like disturbing the theater. And you're like, all right, cool, man. All right. And I'm like, literally take you out of the movie. I like shake you. And I'm like, that's Jared Padalecki. So anytime there's a Supernatural cast member, I'm legit going to give him a shout out, even if it's in the middle of the movie. But shout out to Jim, who plays Bobby, who's one of the best supporting characters in any TV show you'll see. He plays an amazing supporting character in Supernatural, which
really?
You should watch, by the way.
Yeah,
that's another atmospheric, fun horror show that I enjoy thoroughly. Let's jump into some questions. Adam Johnson says, speaking of Crimson Peak, with Crimson Peak, one of the criticisms was that it was more style over substance. With film being such a visual medium, do you think that is necessarily a bad thing? Are there ever times when an abundance of style is great for a movie?
Yeah, I mean, that's what
Crimson Peak is an example of that.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, there are of course examples where there is a lot of style and not really.
But sometimes the style is the substance.
Exactly, and I think especially for a film that's such a visual medium, being able to distinguish, how a camera moves and how the editing is, maybe flashy, maybe not so flashy, the way that's what makes it so unique and so fun and so interesting. You can't look at just like a random piece of painting and have all these great like details and all this stuff in it, or music, you're just kind of hearing it. But with film, you're getting it all. You're getting the visuals, you're getting the sound, you're getting the story, you're getting the literature, you're getting the performances, and a lot of times the way actors bring a level of okay, where is the line for the over the top and where is it not? That's a little trickier for a lot of people.
But I think everyone in a Del Toro film nails it.
Yeah,
I think he's really good at directing actors in the sense of what movie they're in. Mm-hmm. I think he's great at that.
Right,
personally.
And the acting in Pan's Labyrinth and The Devil's Backbone and something more
Pacific
serious.
Rim, making it more over the top.
Right. They're different performances, and you see the wide range of what he can carry out. So yeah, I mean, and I think personally, even if it's a little shifty, I think shifts in tone are what's good about movies. You know what I mean? If a movie is able, talking about Pan's Labyrinth being deadly serious, there are some kind of funny moments in there.
And kind of silly, over the top moments.
Yeah. So I'm all for that, and I think Guillermo nails that down to a T. So.
Especially personally in Crimson Peak.
Oh yeah.
Delicia April says, "What do you think is Guillermo del Toro's directing strength? I think he's so fearless with his films and confident with his own imagination. Who'd think that a movie like Shape of Water could exist and it's actually great? So what do you think is his biggest strength?" Guillermo del Toro.
Well, I mean, you kind of allude to it, the imagination, right? We don't see a lot of directors have such interesting imagery and character designs and creatures and fun aspects to it that a lot of it, you just don't see that a lot, honestly. And I think that he does that really successfully, and it comes from a really strong place of having such a care, attention to detail, that everything works and feels right.
And I think one thing too, and I mentioned this before, the fact that he's creating modern fairy tales, the fact that he's creating, like, this is this is a new version of a fairy tale, and a fairy tale follows these different types of tropes and themes, and he's making it a different modern version of that, right?
Yeah, he's subverting it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's also creating that formula of something that represents something, like I said before, thematic, where it's like this is in your face and it represents this, and this is in your face and it represents this, whether it's fascism and being socially antagonized or being put down or being regarded as different. That's something that always comes up as a theme from Guillermo del Toro's movies, is the fact of someone who's regarded as being different, and how they fight that and how they can represent that in a different thematic way, right? Where that's something that he's so good at expressing in all his movies, that I think that he does so well, is creating that fairy tale mentality and bringing it to kind of a modern era.
Right, 100%.
And he does that great with obviously Pan's Labyrinth.
Yeah.
But even Crimson Peak, you can say that's like a different version of a fairy tale.
Yeah.
Chris says, GDT has a number of projects he started to develop, but they never manifested. Which of these scrapped films would you most like to have seen? I think his Shadow of Colossus adaptation could have been the first great video game movie. What do you think?
That's what I was gonna say.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's good. Talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, Shadow. Have you played this game or?
I haven't. Remind me which one is Shadow of Colossus.
It's like I haven't played it in so long, but it's like the giant rock figure.
And, I think I have heard of this game.
Yeah, little kid. Yeah. To me, this one of the.
It's regarded as one of the best games in recent memory.
Oh, it is. It is. It really. I remember playing this on PS2. Man, it's a great game. I think that would have been 100% the first great video, especially considering the mythology that they introduced in this. In this game,
cool, man.
Yeah,
just looking up images of it.
Yeah. I mean, his visual style just fits right in with what they could do with this film, and unfortunately, he had a lot of great films that kind of left the wayside too. He was going to adapt a H.P. Lovecraft novel, All of the Mountains Down.
I didn't know about that. That sounds crazy.
Yeah,
holy crap!
It ended up falling. But
can you imagine a Lovecraft Guillermo film?
Exactly. Well, that was right before Hellboy, so he ended up incorporating a lot of those images into the Hellboy stuff. The exact name of it was At the Mountains of Madness. H.P. Lovecraft. Yeah, that's what he was going to adapt. But again, he incorporates that into his other work, and his sense of inspiration from a Lovecraftian.
You could say he is like a visual representation of what a Lovecraft movie would be.
Oh yeah, absolutely. All of his movies. So I would have been happy to see that, and there's always going to be a level of curiosity with the whole Hobbit thing. If you would,
the Hobbit one is an interesting one.
Yeah,
shout out to the Hobbit movies.
Yeah. What about you though? Is there anything that
I mentioned it before, but I kind of wanted to see a Pacific Rim 2 directed by Guillermo del Toro. Yeah. He was attached to do it, like he was gonna do it, but it just didn't fall through, and he asked for too much money, and a bunch of things just didn't work out, and he went on to Shape of Water instead. But I would have liked to have seen a sequel. I'm not a Hellboy 2. I'm sorry, a Pacific Rim 2. Right. That to see him develop, because I think he's great at making sequels. I think that's one of his strong suits, is the fact that he makes great sequels.
Yeah.
Blade 2, Hellboy 2, both better than the first, in my opinion.
Do you think Hellboy 3, what do you think about if that would have happened?
Yeah, he was going to do a Hellboy 3. I forgot about that. Yeah, I think it would have worked out good. I just feel like I'm not as upset about that one, because I don't have the biggest connection to Hellboy, but also the fact that I do think that it's an interesting property to put into the hands of someone else. Then again, that release date for the new Hellboy, did you see that?
When is it?
It's January 9th of 2019 or something like that. And that sounds awful. I know that's such a premature statement to say that a release date can say a lot about a movie, but guess what? A release date can say a lot about a movie.
Yeah, well,
and making it in the first or second week of January?
Yeah. That's what I was going to say. It feels like the end of January, I'd be like, oh, that's cool. But beginning, it's a little tough.
The second week you're still competing against Han Solo? The Han Solo
really?
movie?
Oh, that's when it comes out?
Yeah.
See,
no, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. Han Solo, they moved it back up.
It's the Avatar sequel that comes
out. The
out.
Avatar sequel, yeah. But still, I'm like, oh, that just doesn't sound good.
Yeah, I'm hoping for the best for that, and I think David Harbour is a great actor, so hopefully he could pull that off really well.
Random Man says, do you think Guillermo del Toro is one of the best visual directors of this era? Yes.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I mean, it should be said that he's worked with the same cinematographer on all of his films, if I'm not mistaken, except for Crimson Peak. I think, but all of his other movies besides, I can't think of the DP's name off the top of my head, but like his
For Pan's Labyrinth?
yeah,
Isn't it Guillermo Navarro or Guillermo?
I think that's it. Yeah, but I think he shot the majority of his films as well. I think except for Crimson Peak, but he, again, that's part of what it is. I mean, we talked about it with Zack Snyder and Larry Fong. I'm sorry, and how the DP and director relationship influences a lot of the visual style and substance of a movie. So.
Absolutely. One thing I definitely wanted to mention about him too is the fact that everything. Guillermo del Toro is a very hands-on director, extremely hands-on. Everything that he greenlights and he's allowed, he's the kind of director that we've talked about a lot in this podcast about directors who kind of get pushed around. He's the guy who won't get pushed around. He's the one who will pull his own weight and be like, no, I'm going to do it this way for the most part. Like he's very much, seeing him and behind the scenes, you see him be very much like, no me gusta, do this. No, I want this. No, that's it. This is what I want. Everything that goes on in his brain, we get to see it in a movie. And I think that's what a good filmmaker should do, is we should see his vision in a movie. And he's able to work with great DPs and work with great production designers and work with great makeup artists, work with great character performers like a Doug Jones or different actors that he puts in all his movies, like a Ron Perlman he puts in all his movies, or different actors that he recycles in all his movies.
Right.
And he's able to visually create what is going on in his brain.
Oh, yeah.
Whether it's and if you want to say that that's mainly visual, or if you want to say that that's very surface level, then that's on you. But what I say is that it's very beautiful and it's very interesting and it's very artistically overt and artistically, at the same time, artistically challenging. And it makes you think in a different way. And I think that's so beautiful because he's able to manifest his brain onto the screen.
Yeah.
And one of the best, he's one of the best at doing that, if that makes any sense.
Definitely.
Manifesting your actual vision on a screen. That's how I want it to look like. That's how crazy I wanted it to look like. And boom, that's what it is.
Right.
And he's one of the best at doing that.
Oh, 100%.
And that's why to me, he's one of those guys who's able to take something like and make it very anime, in the sense of like that's what anime is. It's supposed to be a crazy vision imagined in a extreme over the top way and visually realized. And that's what Attack on Titan is. That's what Ghost in the Shell is. It's basically this essence of artistic worlds and artistic visions that are so grand in scale, and being able to do it. And you're able to do it because it is animation. And another anime that does that so well is The Ancient Magus Bride, or The Ancient Magus Bride, which is a new anime, but it's able to take those visual elements and fairy tale kind of style and take you into that world. And he's able to take you inside his brain so well.
Right.
And I just love that.
Yeah, no. And I think that's the objective of any great filmmaker, is to put you in their perspective and see what they see in the world and how their experiences and how their background and how what they love influence the visual style of their movies and their art and their expression. So
absolutely. Last question. Derp Scary says, does Blade 2 hold up? Hell yeah, it does, bro. Hell yeah. I talked a lot about Blade 2, so I'm going to stop at that. But I definitely want to give your final thoughts. I want to hear your final thoughts on Guillermo del Toro before we peace out and close up shop.
No, I mean, to me, like I said in the beginning, he's one of the great modern filmmakers living today. He has proven he could do the quiet, kind of dramatic stuff with, Pan's Labyrinth and, of course, now Shape of Water. But he can also do the big budget, exciting stuff like Pacific Rim and the Hellboys and the Blades and all that stuff. So, he has a wide range of abilities, but it's all consistent. And if you watch all of his films, it's very clearly a Guillermo del Toro film. Even something like Pacific Rim, which could have easily been compromised by like a bunch of studios and how they want it to look and all this stuff. But no, it's his visuals, it's his style, and you feel that all through the picture. And most importantly, in his movies, you could feel like the love and the passion and the energy behind all of his films too. And going again back to the opening when we're talking about the themes that he represents, the way he's, talking about how personal tragedy influences a character's manifestation of the world and of the societal issues that they're dealing with. Again, we talked about the Devil's Backbone with the Civil War, and same thing with Pan's Labyrinth, but even in something like Pacific Rim with the societal conflicts of the international relations and how that collides into a microcosm of these people kind of having a tough time interacting with each other. And, Charlie Hunnam's getting into fights, but then they have to team back up together to fight these giant kaijus. And in Crimson Peak, obviously, the issue of feminism and how that influences, the Jessica Chastain's character and with Mia Wasikowski's character. So to me, it's so interesting. It's so vibrant and effective how the social commentary comes into his films. And again, coming through the aid of visuals and through color and through sound, but also through the fantasy elements being a greater extension of the metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and he's able to create certain images that stick with you so well.
mm-hmm.
That's the thing that sticks out to me the most, is the fact that it's images that will stay with me forever, pretty much.
Yeah.
Whether it be in Crimson Peak or in Pan's Labyrinth, or even dude, I haven't even seen Shape of Water yet. I'm so pumped to see it this week.
Mm-hmm.
But even in trailers for Shape of Water, there are certain images in that trailer that make me feel like, holy crap, that's a beautiful image that could stay with me till the end of time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's just a strike. There's some striking images that stick with you so well, and he's so good at creating that.
Right.
I'll say my final thoughts. Obviously, when it comes to Guillermo del Toro, I can never talk enough about the fact that he is a Mexican director, and the fact that he is Latino, and the fact that he comes from that upbringing, and the fact that he's able to create a different style and a different representation of a Mexican director, and the fact that he's able to influence and to mentor and other Latino directors like Muschietti, Andres Muschietti,
right.
from Argentina, and who his Guillermo del Toro's heart and his love for creative Latinos is able to influence someone like Andres to make an It movie that is probably going to be my top 10 favorite of the year this year. That's how much I love the new It movie, and the fact that comes from a mentorship of a Guillermo del Toro. That to me should say a million words about him. Not just the movies you make, and not just the type of images you're able to create, but the type of people you're able to influence in order to make their vision come true. Right. That's what a good inspiration does. That's what a good mentor does, is the fact that they're able to find other talent and to help them realize their talent in a big level, which is what he did with Muschietti and It. And that to me speaks volumes of Guillermo del Toro. The fact that he's able to influence these new upcoming Latino directors and upcoming Mexican and Latino filmmakers, and the fact that he's able to create his world and his vision in a way that's very captivating to the human eye, in a way that's just absolutely beautiful and striking, and it, like I said before, that will stay with you forever. That to me is always going to be the best part of him. Right. And the fact that you can see his heart on the screen. Not just his mind on the screen, but also his heart on the screen, if that makes any sense. Yeah. With his passion, with his thoughts on different themes and different, aspects of society.
Right. You talk about influences real quick. Like, without Guillermo del Toro, there probably wouldn't be like this explosion of like Lovecraftian stuff that we see now. I mean, before Hellboy and before Pan's Labyrinth, we didn't see a lot of the big alien creatures with the tentacles and multiple legs and all that. Now we see it everywhere. Stranger Things, and a lot of sci-fi and horror TV shows. I mean, of course, and Prometheus is responsible for helping bring that back a little bit too. But just the idea of that Guillermo has this sense of, in this visual style that's so transcendent of just his movies that can expand worldwide, and that just, and even now we're talking about the monster movies too. I mean, big monster movies before Pacific Rim, nobody was really taking a gamble on them, really. I mean, now we have a new Godzilla, we have a new King Kong, and now there's talks of the King Kong Godzilla potentially meshing with the Pacific Rim universe. So I think that's all really interesting and fascinating. And of course, we're going to get to an Fauzo Cuarón episode later, and and you're into episode at a later date. But you know, all of these great international filmmakers coming into the American landscape and adding something new and new perspective to the cinema that we enjoy and we consume is always the best to me. So.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's so important to get that Latino perspective, and I love that if we don't get it as much in front of the camera, because to be honest, we don't, as far as actors wise or representation as far as characters wise, at least we can get it behind the camera, and we can get it in the biggest stage of them all, which is in the box office and in the award shows. Yeah. So if we can get a Guillermo del Toro an Oscar, I would love it. If we can get more Latino directors the kind of attention that we give other directors, that to me is beautiful, because it showcases the different talent and diversity and the beauty of diversity, because with diversity comes these new visions and these new appreciations for different artistic visions.
Yeah, even with animated shows like
Troll Hunters?
Troll Hunters, yes, and Book of Life, that he produced as well. So Troll Hunters and Book of Life, both movies and television shows that has a strong Latin influence, I should say. Mm-hmm. So you know, I think that's really brilliant as well.
And now we see Coco in theaters too, that I mentioned before.
Right,
and Coco talks about it. It talks about the art from Mexico being so unique and so different, and coming from different worlds, whether it be art and painting, art and music, art in our costumes and our designs and our visions, and art and culture. Art that's ingrained within the culture of Mexico or in the culture of Latinos is beautiful, and it's something that should be given a spotlight, and it should be given something that should be seen to all over the world, and it's being seen and being consumed by all over the world in such a appreciative way right now with Coco. Right. Coco is being consumed in a way that people are saying that's really cool, no matter if you're black, white, Asian, or Hispanic. It's cool no matter what. But the fact that we give it a chance to be seen by everyone is the important thing.
Right.
So obviously, guys, we want to hear your thoughts. So leave us your comments down below. What's your favorite Guillermo del Toro film? What do you think about his movies? What do you think about his visual representation, his use of color, and the types of themes that he's able to hit upon? Let us know in the comments down below, guys. That was our episode of The Meaning of Podcast. I am Ace.
This is RB3.
And we will see you guys next time. We're peacing out.